Chapter 17 of Wuthering Heights. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Jeff Cowkill. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Chapter 17. That Friday made the last of our fine days for a month. In the evening the weather broke. The wind shifted from south to northeast and brought rain first, and then sleet and snow. On the morrow one could hardly imagine that there had been 3 weeks of summer. The primroses and crocuses were hidden under wintry drifts. The larks were silent, the young leaves of the early trees smitten and blackened. And dreary and chill and dismal that morrow did creep over. My master kept his room. I took possession of the lonely parlor, converting it into a nursery. And there I was, sitting with the moaning doll of a child laid on my knee, rocking it to and fro, and watching meanwhile the still driving flakes build up the uncurtained window, when the door opened, and some person entered out of breath and laughing. My anger was greater than my astonishment for a minute. I supposed it one of the maids, and I cried, "Have done! How dare you show your giddiness here? What would Mr. Linton say if he heard you?" "Excuse me," answered a familiar voice, "but I know Edgar is in bed, and I cannot stop myself." With that the speaker came toward the fire, panting and holding her hand to her side. "I've run the whole way from Wuthering Heights," she continued after a pause, "except where I've flown. I couldn't count the number of falls I've had. Oh, I'm aching all over. But don't be alarmed. There shall be an explanation as soon as I can give it. Only just have the goodness to step out and order the carriage to take me on to Gimmerton, and tell a servant to seek up a few clothes in my wardrobe." The intruder was Mrs. Heathcliff. She certainly seemed in no laughing predicament. Her hair streamed on her shoulders, dripping with snow and water. She was dressed in the girlish dress she commonly wore, befitting her age more than her position. A low frock with short sleeves, and nothing on either head or neck. The frock was of light silk and clung to her with wet, and her feet were protected merely by thin slippers. Add to this a deep cut under one ear, which only the cold prevented from bleeding profusely, a white face scratched and bruised, and a frame hardly able to support itself through fatigue, and you may fancy my first fright was not much allayed when I had had leisure to examine her. "My dear young lady," I exclaimed, "I'll stir nowhere and hear nothing till you've removed every article of your clothes and put on dry things, and certainly you shall not go to Gimmerton tonight, so it's needless to order the carriage." "Certainly I shall," she said, "walking or riding. Yet I've no objection to dress myself decently. And, see how it flows down my neck now. The fire does make it smart." She insisted on my fulfilling her directions before she would let me touch her, and not till after the coachman had been instructed to get ready and a maid set to pack up some necessary attire did I obtain her consent for binding the wound and helping to change her garments. "Now, Ellen," she said when my task was finished and she was seated in an easy chair on the hearth with a cup of tea before her, "you sit down opposite me and put poor Catherine's baby away. I don't like to see it. Now, you mustn't think I care little for Catherine because I behaved so foolishly on entering. I've cried too, bitterly. Yes, more than anyone else has reason to cry. We parted unreconciled, you remember, and I shan't forgive myself. But for all that, I was not going to sympathize with him. The brute beast. Oh, give me the poker. This is the last thing of his I have about me." And she slipped the gold ring from her third finger and threw it on the floor. "I'll smash it," she continued, striking it with childish spite. "And then I'll burn it." And she took and dropped the misused article among the coals. "There! He shall buy another if he gets me back again. He'd be capable of coming to seek me to tease Edgar. I dare not stay lest that notion should possess his wicked head. And besides, Edgar has not been kind, has he? And I won't come suing for his assistance, nor will I bring him into more trouble. Necessity compelled me to seek shelter here. Though, if I'd not learned he was out of the way, I'd have halted at the kitchen, washed my face, warmed myself, got you to bring what I wanted, and departed again to anywhere out of the reach of my accursed, that incarnate Garblin. He was in such a fury. If he had caught me... Oh, it's a pity Earnshaw's not his match in strength. I wouldn't have run till I'd seen him all but demolished had Hindley been able to do it." "Well, don't talk so fast, miss," I interrupted.
You'll disorder the handkerchief I've tied around your face and make the cut bleed again. Drink your tea and take breath and give over laughing. Laughter's sadly out of place under this roof, and in your condition." "An undeniable truth," she replied. "Listen to that child. It maintains a constant wail. Send it out of my hearing for an hour. I shan't stay any longer." I rang the bell and committed it to a servant's care, and then I inquired what had urged her to escape from Wuthering Heights in such an unlikely plight, and where she meant to go, as she refused remaining with us. "I ought, and I wished to remain," answered she, "to cheer Edgar, and take care of the baby, for two things, and because the Grange is my right home. But I tell you he won't let me. Do you think he could bear to see me grow fat and merry, could bear to think that we were tranquil, and not resolve on poisoning our comfort? Now, I have the satisfaction of being sure that he detests me to the point of its annoying him seriously to have me within earshot or eyesight. I notice when I enter his presence, the muscles of his countenance are involuntarily distorted into an expression of hatred, partly arising from his knowledge of the good causes I have to feel that sentiment for him, and partly from original aversion. It is strong enough to make me feel pretty certain that he would not chase me over England, supposing I contrived a clear escape, and therefore I must get quite away. I've recovered from my first desire to be killed by him. I'd rather he'd kill himself. He has extinguished my love effectually, and so I'm at my ease. I can recollect yet how I loved him, and can dimly imagine that I could still be loving him if... No, even if he had doted on me, the devilish nature would have revealed its existence somehow. Catherine had an awfully perverted taste to esteem him so dearly, knowing him so well. Monster! Would that he could be blotted out of creation, and out of my memory. "Hush, hush, he's a human being," I said. "Be more charitable. There are worse men than he is yet." "He's not a human being," she retorted, "and he has no claim on my charity. I gave him my heart, and he took and pinched it to death and flung it back to me. People feel with their hearts, Ellen, and since he has destroyed mine, I have not power to feel for him. And I would not, though he groaned from this to his dying day, and wept tears of blood for Catherine. No, indeed I wouldn't." And here Isabella began to cry, but immediately dashing the water from her lashes, she recommenced. "You asked what has driven me to flight at last. I was compelled to attempt it because I had succeeded in rousing his rage a pitch above his malignity. Pulling out the nerves with red-hot pincers requires more coolness than knocking on the head. He was worked up to forget the fiendish prudence he had boasted of, and proceeded to murderous violence. I experienced pleasure in being able to exasperate him. The sense of pleasure woke my instinct of self-preservation, so I fairly broke free. Yet if ever I come into his hands again, he is welcome to a signal revenge. Yesterday, Mr. Earnshaw should have been at the funeral. He kept himself sober for the purpose, tolerably sober, not going to bed mad at 6 o'clock and getting up drunk at 12. Consequently, he rose in suicidal low spirits, as fit for the church as for a dance, and instead he sat down by the fire and swallowed gin or brandy by the tumblerfuls. Heathcliff, I shudder to name him, has been a stranger in the house from last Sunday till today. Whether the angels have fed him or his kin beneath, I cannot tell, but he has not eaten a meal with us for nearly a week. He had just come home at dawn, and gone upstairs to his chamber, locking himself in, as if anybody dreamt of coveting his company. There he was continued, praying like a Methodist, only the deity he implored is senseless dust and ashes, and God, when addressed, was curiously confounded with his own black father. After concluding these precious orisons, and they lasted generally till he grew hoarse and his voice was strangled in his throat, he would be off again, always straight down to the Grange. I wonder Edgar did not send for a constable and give him into custody. For me, grieved as I was about Catherine, it was impossible to avoid regarding this season of deliverance from degrading oppression as a holiday. I recovered spirit sufficiently to bear Joseph's eternal lectures without weeping, and to move up and down the house less with the foot of a frighted thief than formerly. You wouldn't think that I should cry at anything Joseph could say, but he and Hareton are detestable companions. I'd rather sit with Hindley and hear his awful talk than with the little master and his staunch supporter, that odious old man. When Heathcliff is in, I'm often obliged to seek the kitchen and their society, or starve among the damp uninhabited chambers. When he's not, as was the case this week, I establish a table and chair at one corner of the house fire, and never mind how Mr. Earnshaw may occupy himself, and he does not interfere with my arrangements. He's quieter now than he used to be, if no one provokes him, more sullen and depressed and less furious. Joseph affirms he's sure he's an altered man, that the Lord has touched his heart, and he is saved so as by fire. I'm puzzled to detect signs of the favourable change, but it's not my business. Yester evening I sat in my nook reading some old books till late on towards 12. It seemed so dismal to go upstairs with the wild snow blowing outside, and my thoughts continually reverting to the kirkyard and to the new-made grave. I dare hardly lift my eyes from the page before me, that melancholy scene so instantly usurped its place. Hindley sat opposite, his head leant on his hand, perhaps meditating on the same subject. He had ceased drinking at a point below irrationality, and had neither stirred nor spoken during 2 or 3 hours. There was no sound through the house but the moaning wind, which shook the windows every now and then, the faint crackling of the coals, and the click of my snuffers as I removed at intervals the long wick of the candle. Hareton and Joseph were probably fast asleep in bed. It was very, very sad, and while I read I sighed, for it seemed as if all joy had vanished from the world, never to be restored. The doleful silence was broken at length by the sound of the kitchen latch. Heathcliff had returned from his watch earlier than usual, owing, I suppose, to the sudden storm. That entrance was fastened, and we heard him coming round to get in by the other. I rose with an irrepressible expression of what I felt on my lips, which induced my companion, who had been staring towards the door, to turn and look at me. "I'll keep him out 5 minutes," he exclaimed. "You won't object?" "No, you may keep him out the whole night for me," I answered. "Do put the key in the lock and draw the bolts." Earnshaw accomplished this ere his guest reached the front. He then came and brought his chair to the other side of my table, leaning over it, and searching in my eyes for a sympathy with the burning hate that gleamed from his. As he both looked and felt like an assassin, he couldn't exactly find that, but he discovered enough to encourage him to speak. "You and I," he said, "have each a great debt to settle with the man out yonder. If we were neither of us cowards, we might combine to discharge it. Are you as soft as your brother? Are you willing to endure till the last, and not once attempt a repayment?" "I'm weary of enduring now," I replied, "and I'd be glad of a retaliation that wouldn't recoil on myself. But treachery and violence are spears pointed at both ends. They wound those who resort to them worse than their enemies."
"Treachery and violence are a just return for treachery and violence," cried Hindley. "Mrs. Heathcliff, I'll ask you to do nothing but sit still and be dumb. Tell me now, can you? I'm sure you would have as much pleasure as I in witnessing the conclusion of the fiend's existence. He'll be your death unless you overreach him, and he'll be my ruin. Damn the hellish villain! He knocks at the door as if he were master here already. Promise to hold your tongue, and before that clock strikes, it wants 3 minutes of 1, you're a free woman."
He took the implements which I described to you in my letter from his breast, and would have turned down the candle. I snatched it away, however, and seized his arm. "I'll not hold my tongue," I said. "You mustn't touch him. Let the door remain shut and be quiet."
"No! I've formed my resolution, and by God I'll execute it!" cried the desperate being. "I'll do you a kindness in spite of yourself, and Hareton justice, and you needn't trouble your head to screen me. Catherine is gone. Nobody alive would regret me or be ashamed though I cut my throat this minute, and it's time to make an end.
I might as well have struggled with a bear or reasoned with a lunatic. The only resource left me was to run to a lattice and warn his intended victim of the fate which awaited him. "You'd better seek shelter somewhere else tonight," I exclaimed in rather a triumphant tone. "Mr. Earnshaw has a mind to shoot you if you persist in endeavouring to enter."
"You'd better open the door, you,"
he answered, addressing me with some elegant term that I don't care to repeat. "I shall not meddle in the matter," I retorted again. "Come in and get shot if you please. I've done my duty." With that, I shut the window and returned to my place by the fire, having too small a stock of hypocrisy at my command to pretend any anxiety for the danger that menaced him. Earnshaw swore passionately at me, affirming that I loved the villain yet, and calling me all sorts of names for the base spirit I evinced. And I, in my secret heart, and conscience never reproached me, thought what a blessing it would be for him should Heathcliff put him out of misery, and what a blessing for me should he send Heathcliff to his right abode. As I sat nursing these reflections, the casement behind me was banged onto the floor by a blow from the latter individual, and his black countenance looked blightingly through. The stanchion stood too close to suffer his shoulders to follow, and I smiled, exulting in my fancied security. His hair and clothes were whitened with snow, and his sharp, cannibal teeth, revealed by cold and wrath, gleamed through the dark.
"Isabella, let me in, or I'll make you repent," he gurned, as Joseph calls it.
"I cannot commit murder," I replied. "Mr. Hindley stands sentinel with a knife and loaded pistol."
"Let me in by the kitchen door," he said.
"Hindley will be there before me," I answered, "and that's a poor love of yours that cannot bear a shower of snow. We were left at peace in our beds as long as the summer moon shone, but the moment a blast of winter returns, you must run for shelter. Heathcliff, if I were you, I'd go stretch myself over her grave and die like a faithful dog. The world is surely not worth living in now, is it? You had distinctly impressed on me the idea that Catherine was the whole joy of your life. I can't imagine how you think of surviving her loss."
"He's here, is he?"
exclaimed my companion, rushing to the gap.
"If I can get my arm out, I can hit him."
"I'm afraid, Ellen, you'll set me down as really wicked, but you don't know all, so don't judge. I wouldn't have aided or abetted an attempt on even his life for anything. Wish that he were dead I must, and therefore I was fearfully disappointed and unnerved by terror for the consequence of my taunting speech, when he flung himself on Earnshaw's weapon and wrenched it from his grasp. The charge exploded, and the knife, in springing back, closed into its owner's wrist. Heathcliff pulled it away by main force, slitting up the flesh as it passed on, and thrust it dripping into his pocket. He then took a stone, struck down the division between two windows, and sprang in. His adversary had fallen senseless with excessive pain and the flow of blood that gushed from an artery or a large vein, and the ruffian kicked and trampled on him, and dashed his head repeatedly against the flags, holding me with one hand meantime to prevent me summoning Joseph. He exerted preterhuman self-denial in abstaining from finishing him completely. But, getting out of breath, he finally desisted, and dragged the apparently inanimate body onto the settle. There he tore off the sleeve of Earnshaw's coat, and bound up the wound with brutal roughness, spitting and cursing during the operation as energetically as he'd kicked before. Being at liberty, I lost no time in seeking the old servant, who, having gathered by degrees the purport of my hasty tale, hurried below, gasping as he descended the steps, two at once.
"What's there to do now? What is there to do now?"
"There's this to do," thundered Heathcliff, "that your master's mad, and should he last another month, I'll have him to an asylum.
And how the devil did you come to fasten me out, you toothless hound? Don't stand muttering and mumbling there. Come, I'm not going to nurse him. Wash that stuff away, and mind the sparks of your candle. It's more than half brandy." "I saw you about murdering on him," exclaimed Joseph, lifting his hands and eyes in horror. "If ever I see the sight like that, may the Lord—" Heathcliff gave him a push on to his knees in the middle of the blood, and flung a towel to him. But instead of proceeding to dry it up, he joined his hands and began a prayer, which excited my laughter from its odd phraseology. I was in the condition of mind to be shocked at nothing,
In fact, I was as reckless as some malefactors show themselves at the foot of the gallows.
"Oh, I forgot you," said the tyrant. "You shall do that. Down with you. And you conspire with him against me, do you, viper? There, that's work fit for you."
He shook me till my teeth rattled and pitched me beside Joseph, who steadily concluded his supplications and then rose, vowing he would set off for the Grange directly. Mr. Linton was a magistrate, and though he had 50 wives dead, he should inquire into this. He was so obstinate in his resolution that Heathcliff deemed it expedient to compel from my lips a recapitulation of what had taken place, standing over me, heaving with malevolence as I reluctantly delivered the account and answer to his questions. It required a great deal of labour to satisfy the old man that Heathcliff was not the aggressor, especially with my hardly wrung replies. However, Mr. Earnshaw soon convinced him that he was alive still. Joseph hastened to administer a dose of spirits, and by their succour his master presently regained motion and consciousness. Heathcliff, aware that his opponent was ignorant of the treatment received while insensible, called him deliriously intoxicated, and said he should not notice his atrocious conduct further, but advised him to get to bed. To my joy, he left us after giving this judicious counsel, and Hindley stretched himself on the hearthstone. I departed to my own room, marvelling that I had escaped so easily. This morning, when I came down, about half an hour before noon, Mr. Earnshaw was sitting by the fire, deadly sick. His evil genius, almost as gaunt and ghastly, leant against the chimney. Neither appeared inclined to dine, and having waited till all was cold on the table, I commenced alone. Nothing hindered me from eating heartily, and I experienced a certain sense of satisfaction and superiority as at intervals I cast a look towards my silent companions, and felt the comfort of a quiet conscience within me. After I had done, I ventured on the unusual liberty of drawing near the fire, going round Earnshaw's seat, and kneeling in the corner beside him. Heathcliff did not glance my way, and I gazed up and contemplated his features almost as confidently as if they had been turned to stone. His forehead, that I once thought so manly, that I now think so diabolical, was shaded with a heavy cloud. His basilisk eyes were nearly quenched by sleeplessness, and weeping, perhaps, for the lashes were wet then. His lips, devoid of their ferocious sneer, and sealed in an expression of unspeakable sadness. Had it been another, I would have covered my face in the presence of such grief. In his case, I was gratified, and ignoble as it seems to insult a fallen enemy, I couldn't miss this chance of sticking in a dart. His weakness was the only time when I could taste the delight of paying wrong for wrong. "Fie, fie, miss," I interrupted. "One might suppose you had never opened a Bible in your life. If God afflict your enemies, surely that ought to suffice you. It is both mean and presumptuous to add your torture to his." "In general, I'll allow that it would be, Ellen," she continued. "But what misery laid on Heathcliff could content me unless I have a hand in it? I'd rather he suffered less if I might cause his sufferings, and he might know that I was the cause. Oh, I owe him so much. On only one condition can I hope to forgive him. It is, if I may take an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. For every wrench of agony return a wrench, reduce him to my level. As he was the first to injure, make him the first to implore pardon. And then, why then, Ellen, I might show you some generosity. But it is utterly impossible I can ever be revenged, and therefore I cannot forgive him." Hindley wanted some water, and I handed him a glass and asked him how he was. "Not as ill as I wish," he replied, "but leaving out my arm, every inch of me is as sore as if I had been fighting with a legion of imps." "Yes, no wonder," was my next remark. "Catherine used to boast that she stood between you and bodily harm. She meant that certain persons would not hurt you for fear of offending her. It's well people don't really rise from their graves, or last night she might have witnessed a repulsive scene. Are not you bruised and cut over your chest and shoulders?"
"I can't say," he answered. "What do you mean? Did he dare to strike me when I was down?"
"He trampled on and kicked you and dashed you to the ground," I whispered, "and his mouth watered to tear you with his teeth, because he's only half man, no, not so much, and the rest fiend." Mr. Earnshaw looked up, like me, to the countenance of our mutual foe, who, absorbed in his anguish, seemed insensible to anything around him. The longer he stood, the plainer his reflections revealed their blackness through his features.
"Oh, if God would give me strength to strangle him in my last agony, I'd go to hell with joy,"
groaned the impatient man, writhing to rise, and sinking back in despair, convinced of his inadequacy for the struggle. "Nay, it's enough that he's murdered one of you," I observed aloud. "At the Grange, everyone knows your sister would have been living now if it had not been for Mr. Heathcliff. After all, it is preferably hated than loved by him. When I recollect how happy we were, how happy Catherine was before he came, I'm fit to curse the day." Most likely Heathcliff noticed more the truth of what was said than the spirit of the person who said it. His attention was roused, I saw, for his eyes rained down tears among the ashes, and he drew his breath in suffocating sighs. I stared full at him and laughed scornfully. The clouded windows of hell flashed a moment towards me. The fiend, which usually looked out, however, was so dimmed and drowned that I did not fear to hazard another sound of derision.
"Get up and be gone out of my sight," said the mourner.
I guessed he uttered those words at least, though his voice was hardly intelligible. "I beg your pardon," I replied, "but I loved Catherine too, and her brother requires attendance, which for her sake I shall supply. Now that she's dead, I see her in Hindley. Hindley has exactly her eyes, if you had not tried to gouge them out and made them black and red. And her—"
"Get up, wretched idiot, before I stamp you to death!"
he cried, making a movement that caused me to make one also. "But then," I continued, holding myself ready to flee, "if poor Catherine had trusted you and assumed the ridiculous, contemptible, degrading title of Mrs. Heathcliff, she would soon have presented a similar picture. She wouldn't have borne your abominable behaviour quietly. Her detestation and disgust must have found voice." The back of the settle and Earnshaw's person interposed between me and him. So instead of endeavouring to reach me, he snatched a dinner knife from the table and flung it at my head. It struck beneath my ear and stopped the sentence I was uttering, but pulling it out, I sprang to the door and delivered another, which I hope went a little deeper than his missile. The last glimpse I caught of him was a furious rush on his part, checked by the embrace of my host, and both fell locked together on the hearth. In my flight through the kitchen, I bid Joseph speed to his master. I knocked over Hareton, who was hanging a litter of puppies from a chair-back in the doorway, and, blessed as a soul escaped from purgatory, I bounded, leaped, and flew down the steep road, then, quitting its windings, shot direct across the moor, rolling over banks and wading through marshes, precipitating myself, in fact, towards the beacon light of the Grange, and far rather would I be condemned to a perpetual dwelling in the infernal regions than even for one night abide beneath the roof of Wuthering Heights again. Isabella stopped speaking and took a drink of tea. Then she rose, and bidding me put on her bonnet and a great shawl I had brought, and turning a deaf ear to my entreaties for her to remain another hour, she stepped on to a chair, kissed Edgar's and Catherine's portraits, bestowed a similar salute on me, and descended to the carriage, accompanied by Fanny, who yelped wild with joy at recovering her mistress. She was driven away, never to revisit this neighbourhood. But a regular correspondence was established between her and my master when things were more settled. I believe her new abode was in the south, near London. There she had a son born a few months subsequent to her escape. He was christened Linton, and from the first she reported him to be an ailing, peevish creature. Mr. Heathcliff, meeting me one day in the village, inquired where she lived. I refused to tell. He remarked that it was not of any moment, only she must beware of coming to her brother. She would not be with him if he had to keep her himself. Though I would give no information, he discovered, through some of the other servants, both her place of residence and the existence of the child. Still, he didn't molest her, for which forbearance she might thank his aversion, I suppose. He often asked about the infant when he saw me, and on hearing its name, smiled grimly and observed, "They wish me to hate it too, do they?" "I don't think they wish you to know anything about it," I answered. "But I'll have it," he said, "when I want it. They may reckon on that." Fortunately, its mother died before the time arrived, some 13 years after the decease of Catherine, when Linton was 12, or a little more. On the day succeeding Isabella's unexpected visit, I had no opportunity of speaking to my master. He shunned conversation, and was fit for discussing nothing. When I could get him to listen, I saw it pleased him that his sister had left her husband, whom he abhorred with an intensity which the mildness of his nature would scarcely seem to allow. So deep and sensitive was his aversion that he refrained from going anywhere where he was likely to see or hear of Heathcliff. Grief, and that together, transformed him into a complete hermit. He threw up his office of magistrate, ceased even to attend church, avoided the village on all occasions, and spent a life of entire seclusion within the limits of his park and grounds, only varied by solitary rambles on the moors, and visits to the grave of his wife, mostly at evening, or early morning before other wanderers were abroad. But he was too good to be thoroughly unhappy long. He didn't pray for Catherine's soul to haunt him. Time brought resignation, and a melancholy sweeter than common joy. He recalled her memory with ardent, tender love, and hopeful aspiring to the better world, where he doubted not she was gone. And he had earthly consolation and affections also. For a few days, I said, he seemed regardless of the puny successor to the departed. That coldness melted as fast as snow in April, and ere the tiny thing could stammer a word or totter a step, it wielded a despot sceptre in his heart. It was named Catherine, but he never called it the name in full, as he had never called the first Catherine short, probably because Heathcliff had a habit of doing so. The little one was always Cathy. It formed to him a distinction from the mother, and yet a connection with her, and his attachment sprang from its relation to her far more than from its being his own. I used to draw a comparison between him and Hindley Earnshaw, and perplex myself to explain satisfactorily why their conduct was so opposite in similar circumstances. They had both been fond husbands, and were both attached to their children, and I could not see how they shouldn't both have taken the same road for good or evil. But I thought in my mind, Hindley, with apparently the stronger head, has shown himself sadly the worse and the weaker man. When his ship struck, the captain abandoned his post, and the crew, instead of trying to save her, rushed into riot and confusion, leaving no hope for their luckless vessel. Linton, on the contrary, displayed the true courage of a loyal and faithful soul. He trusted God, and God comforted him. One hoped, and the other despaired. They chose their own lots, and were righteously doomed to endure them. But you'll not want to hear my moralizing, Mr. Lockwood. You'll judge as well as I can all these things. At least, you'll think you will, and that's the same. The end of Earnshaw was what might have been expected. It followed fast on his sister's. There was scarcely 6 months between them. We at the Grange never got a very succinct account of his state preceding it. All that I did learn was on occasion of going to aid in the preparations for the funeral. Mr. Kenneth came to announce the event to my master. "Well, Nelly," said he, riding into the yard one morning, too early not to alarm me with an instant presentiment of bad news, "it's yours and my turn to go into mourning at present. Who's given us the slip now, do you think?" "Who?" I asked in a flurry. Why, guess, he returned, dismounting and slinging his bridle on a hook by the door, and nip up the corner of your apron. I'm certain you'll need it. Not Mr. Heathcliff, surely? I exclaimed. What? Would you have tears for him? Said the doctor. No, Heathcliff's a tough young fella. He looks blooming today. I've just seen him. He's rapidly regaining flesh since he lost his better half. Who is it then, Mr. Kenneth? I repeated impatiently. Henley Earnshaw. Your old friend Henley, he replied, and my wicked gossip. Oh, he's been too wild for me this long while. There, I said we should draw water. But cheer up. He died true to his character, drunk as a lord. Poor lad. I'm sorry, too. One can't help missing an old companion, though he had the worst tricks with him that ever man imagined, and has done me many a rascally turn. He's barely 27, it seems. That's your own age. Who would have thought you were born in 1 year? I confess this blow was greater to me than the shock of Mrs. Linton's death. Ancient associations lingered round my heart. I sat down in the porch and wept as for a blood relation, desiring Mr. Kenneth to get another servant to introduce him to the master. I could not hinder myself from pondering on the question, had he had fair play? Whatever I did, that idea would bother me. It was so tiresomely pertinacious that I resolved on requesting leave to go to Wuthering Heights and assist in the last duties to the dead. Mr. Linton was extremely reluctant to consent, but I pleaded eloquently for the friendless condition in which he lay, and I said my old master and foster brother had a claim on my services as strong as his own. Besides, I reminded him that the child Hareton was his wife's nephew, and in the absence of nearer kin, he ought to act as its guardian, and he ought to and must inquire how the property was left, and look after the concerns of his brother-in-law. He was unfit for attending to such matters then, but he bid me speak to his lawyer, and at length permitted me to go. His lawyer had been Earnshaw's also. I called at the village and asked him to accompany me. He shook his head and advised that Heathcliff should be let alone, affirming, if the truth were known, Hareton would be found little else than a beggar. His master died in debt, he said. The whole property's mortgaged, and the sole chance for the natural heir is to allow him an opportunity of creating some interest in the creditor's heart, that he may be inclined to deal leniently towards him. When I reached the Heights, I explained that I had come to see everything carried out decently, and Joseph, who appeared in sufficient distress, expressed satisfaction at my presence. Mr. Heathcliff said he did not perceive that I was wanted, but I might stay and order the arrangements for the funeral, if I chose. Correctly, he remarked. That fool's body shall be buried at the crossroads without ceremony of any kind. I happened to leave him 10 minutes yesterday afternoon, and in that interval he fastened the 2 doors of the house against me, and he spent the night in drinking himself to death deliberately. We broke in this morning, for we heard him sporting like a horse, and there he was, laid over the saddle. Flaying and scalping would not have wakened him. I sent for Kenneth, and he came, but not till the beast had changed into carrion. He was both dead and cold and stark, and so you'll allow it was useless making more stir about him. The old servant confirmed this statement, but muttered, I'd rather he'd gone in sound for the doctor. I should have ta'en 10 of the master better nor him, and he warn't dead when I left, not of the sort. I insisted on the funeral being respectable. Mr. Heathcliff said I might have my own way there, too, only he desired me to remember that the money for the whole affair came out of his pocket. He maintained a hard, careless deportment, indicative of neither joy nor sorrow. If anything, it expressed a flinty gratification at a piece of difficult work successfully executed. I observed once, indeed, something like exultation in his aspect. It was just when the people were bearing the coffin from the house. He had the hypocrisy to represent a mourner, and previous to following with Hareton, he lifted the unfortunate child onto the table, and muttered with particular gusto, Now, my bonny lad, you're mine, and we'll see if one tree won't grow as crooked as another, with the same wind to twist it."
The unsuspecting thing was pleased at this speech. He played with Heathcliff's whiskers and stroked his cheek. But I divined its meaning and observed tartly,
"That boy must go back with me to Thrushcross Grange, sir. There's nothing in the world less yours than he is."
"Does Linton say so?" he demanded.
"Of course. He's ordered me to take him," I replied.
"Well," said the scoundrel,
"we'll not argue the subject now, but I have a fancy to try my hand at rearing a young one. So intimate to your master that I must supply the place of this with my own, if he attempt to remove it. I don't engage to let Hareton go undisputed, but I'll be pretty sure to make the other come. Remember to tell him."
This hint was enough to bind our hands. I repeated its substance on my return, and Edgar Linton, little interested at the commencement, spoke no more of interfering. I am not aware that he could have done it to any purpose, had he been ever so willing. The guest was now the master of Wuthering Heights. He held firm possession, and proved to the attorney, who in his turn proved it to Mr. Linton, that Earnshaw had mortgaged every yard of land he owned for cash to supply his mania for gaming, and he, Heathcliff, was the mortgagee. In that manner Hareton, who should now be the first gentleman in the neighbourhood, was reduced to a state of complete dependence on his father's inveterate enemy, and lives in his own house as a servant, deprived of the advantage of wages, quite unable to right himself because of his friendlessness, and his ignorance that he has been wronged. End of chapter 17.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Maria Tafidis. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Chapter 18. The 12 years, continued Mrs. Dean, following that dismal period, were the happiest of my life. My greatest troubles in their passage rose from my little lady's trifling illnesses, which she had to experience in common with all children, rich and poor. For the rest, after the first 6 months, she grew like a larch, and could walk and talk too, in her own way, before the heath blossomed a second time over Mrs. Linton's dust. She was the most winning thing that ever brought sunshine into a desolate house, a real beauty in face, with the Earnshaws' handsome dark eyes, but the Lintons' fair skin and small features, and yellow curling hair. Her spirit was high, though not rough, and qualified by a heart sensitive and lively to excess in its affections. That capacity for intense attachments reminded me of her mother. Still, she did not resemble her, for she could be soft and mild as a dove, and she had a gentle voice and pensive expression. Her anger was never furious, her love never fierce. It was deep and tender. However, it must be acknowledged, she had faults to foil her gift. A propensity to be saucy was one, and a perverse will that indulged children invariably acquire, whether they be good-tempered or cross. If a servant chanced to vex her, it was always, "I shall tell Papa," and if he reproved her, even by a look, you would have thought it a heart-breaking business. I don't believe he ever did speak a harsh word to her. He took her education entirely on himself, and made it an amusement. Fortunately, curiosity and a quick intellect made her an apt scholar. She learned rapidly and eagerly, and did honour to his teaching. Till she reached the age of 13, she had not once been beyond the range of the park by herself. Mr. Linton would take her with him a mile or so outside on rare occasions, but he trusted her to no one else. Gimmerton was an unsubstantial name in her ears. The chapel, the only building she had approached or entered except her own home. Wuthering Heights and Mr. Heathcliff did not exist for her. She was a perfect recluse, and apparently perfectly contented. Sometimes, indeed, while surveying the country from her nursery window, she would observe, "Ellen, how long will it be before I can walk to the top of those hills? I wonder what lies on the other side. Is it the sea?" "No, Miss Cathy," I would answer. "It is hills again, just like these." "And what are those golden rocks like when you stand under them?" she once asked. The abrupt descent of Penistone crags particularly attracted her notice, especially when the setting sun shone on it at the topmost heights, and the whole extent of landscape besides lay in shadow. I explained that they were bare masses of stone, with hardly enough earth in their clefts to nourish a stunted tree. "And why are they bright so long after it is evening here?" she pursued. "Because they are a great deal higher up than we are," replied I. "You could not climb them, they are too high and steep. In winter the frost is always there before it comes to us, and deep into summer I have found snow under that black hollow at the northeast side." "Oh, you have been on them!" she cried gleefully. "Then I can go too when I am a woman. Has Papa been, Ellen?" "Papa would tell you, miss," I answered hastily, "that they are not worth the trouble of visiting. The moors where you ramble with him are much nicer, and Thrushcross Park is the finest place in the world." "But I know the park, and I don't know those," she murmured to herself, "and I should delight to look round me from the broad at tallest point. My little pony Minnie shall take me some time." One of the maids mentioning the fairy cave quite turned her head with a desire to fulfil this project. She teased Mr. Linton about it, and he promised she should have the journey when she got older. But Miss Catherine measured her age by months, and "Now I am old enough to go to Penistone Crags?" was a constant question in her mouth. The road thither wound close by Wuthering Heights. Edgar had not the heart to pass it, so she received as constantly the answer, "Not yet, love, not yet." I said Mrs. Heathcliff lived above a dozen years after quitting her husband. Her family were of a delicate constitution. She and Edgar both lacked the ruddy health that you will generally meet in these parts. What her last illness was, I am not certain. I conjecture they died of the same thing, a kind of fever, slow at its commencement, but incurable, and rapidly consuming life towards the close. She wrote to inform her brother of the probable conclusion of a 4 months' indisposition under which she had suffered, and entreating him to come to her if possible. For she had much to settle, and she wished to bid him adieu, and deliver Linton safely into his hands. Her hope was that Linton might be left with him, as he had been with her. His father, she would fain convince herself, had no desire to assume the burden of his maintenance or education. My master hesitated not a moment in complying with her request, reluctant as he was to leave home at ordinary calls. He flew to answer this, commanding Catherine to my peculiar vigilance in his absence, with reiterated orders that she must not wander out of the park, even under my escort. He did not calculate on her going unaccompanied. He was away 3 weeks. The first day or two, my charge sat in a corner of the library, too sad for either reading or playing. In that quiet state she caused me little trouble, but it was succeeded by an interval of impatient, fretful weariness, and being too busy, and too old, to run up and down amusing her, I hit on a method by which she might entertain herself. I used to send her on her travels round the grounds, now on foot, now on a pony, indulging her with a patient audience of all her real and imaginary adventures when she returned. The summer shone in full prime, and she took such a taste for this solitary rambling, that she often contrived to remain out from breakfast till tea, and then the evenings were spent in recounting her fanciful tales. I did not fear her breaking bounds, because the gates were generally locked, and I thought she would scarcely venture forth alone if they had stood wide open. Unluckily my confidence proved misplaced. Catherine came to me one morning at 8 o'clock, and said she was then a Arabian merchant going to cross the desert with his caravan, that I must give her plenty of provision for herself and beasts, a horse and 3 camels, personated by a large hound and a couple of pointers. I got together a good store of dainties, and slung them in a basket on one side of the saddle. And she sprang up as gay as a fairy, sheltered by her wide-brimmed hat and gauze veil from the July sun, and trotted off with a merry laugh, mocking my cautious counsel to avoid galloping, and come back early. The noted thing never made her appearance at tea, when Traveller the hound, big and old dog and fond of its ease, returned, but neither Cathy nor the pony nor the 2 pointers were visible in any direction. I dispatched emissaries down this path and that path, and at last went wandering in search of myself. There was a labourer working at a fence round a plantation on the borders of the grounds, and I inquired of him if he had seen our young lady. "I saw her at morn," he replied. "She would have me to cut a razor switch, and then she left her galloway over the hedge yonder, where it's lowest, and galloped out of sight." You may guess how I felt at hearing this news. It struck me directly she must have started for Penistone Crags. "What will become of her?" I ejaculated, pushing through a gap which the man was repairing, and making straight to the high road. I walked, as if for rage, mile after mile, till a turn brought me in view of the heights. But no Catherine could I detect far or near. The crags lie about a mile and a half beyond Mr. Heathcliff's place, and that is far from the Grange, so I began to fear night would fall ere I could reach them. And what if she should have slipped in clambering among them, I reflected, and been killed or broken some of her bones? My suspense was truly painful, and at first it gave me delightful relief to observe, in hurrying by the farmhouse, Charlie, the fiercest of the pointers, lying on a window, with swelled head and bleeding ear. I opened the wicket and ran to the door, knocking vehemently for admittance. A woman whom I knew, and who formerly lived at Gimmerton, answered. She had been servant there since the death of Mr. Earnshaw. "Ah," said she, "you are come seeking your little mistress. Don't be frightened. She's here safe, but I'm glad it isn't master." "He is not at home, then, is he?" I panted, quite breathless with quick walking in alarm. "No," she replied. "Both he and Joseph are off, and I think they won't return this hour or more. Step in and rest you a bit." I entered, and beheld my stray lamb sitting on the hearth, rocking herself in a little chair that had been her mother's when a child. Her hat was hung against the wall, and she seemed perfectly at home, laughing and chattering, in the best spirits imaginable, to Hareton, now a great strong lad of 18, who stared at her with considerable curiosity and astonishment, comprehending precisely each of the fluent succession of remarks and questions which her tongue never ceased pouring forth. "Very well, miss," I exclaimed, concealing my joy under an angry countenance. "This is your last ride till papa comes back. I'll not trust you with the threshold again, you naughty, naughty girl." "Aha, Helen," she cried gaily, jumping up and running to my side, "I shall have a pretty story to tell tonight. And so you're funny out. Have you ever been here in your life before?" "Put that hat on and home at once," said I. "I'm dreadfully grieved at you, Miss Cathy. You've done extremely wrong. It's no use pouting and crying. That won't repay the trouble I've had scouring the country after you. To think how Mr. Linton charged me to keep you in, and you stealing off so. It shows you're a cunning little fox, and nobody will put faith in you any more." "What have I done?" sobbed she, instantly checked. "Papa charged me nothing. He'll not scold me, Ellen. He's never cross like you." "Come, come," I repeated. "I'll tie the riband. Now, let's have no petulance. Oh, for shame! You're 13 years old and such a baby." This exclamation was caused by her pushing the hat from her head and retreating to the chimney out of my reach. "Nay," said the servant, "don't be hard on the bonny lass, Mrs. Dean. We may not stop. She'd fain have ridden forwards. I feared you should be uneasy. Hareton offered to go with her, and I thought he should. It's a wild road by the hills." Hareton, during the discussion, stood with his hands in his pockets, too awkward to speak, though he looked as if he didn't relish my intrusion. "How long am I to wait?" I continued, disregarding the woman's interference. "It will be dark in 10 minutes. Where's the pony, Miss Cathy? And where's Phoenix? I shall leave you, unless you be quick, so please yourself." "The pony is in the yard," she replied, "and Phoenix is shut in there. He's bitten, and so is Charlie. I was going to tell you all about it, but you are in a bad temper and don't deserve to hear." I picked up her hat and approached to reinstate it, but perceiving that the people of the house took her part, she commenced capering round the room, and on my giving chase, ran like a mouse over and under and behind the furniture, rendering it ridiculous for me to pursue. Hareton and the woman laughed, and she joined them, and waxed more impertinent still, till I cried in great irritation, "Well, Miss Cathy, if you were aware whose house this is, you'd be glad enough to get out." "It's your father's, isn't it?" said she, turning to Hareton. "Nay," replied, looking down and blushing bashfully. He could not stand a steady gaze from her eyes, though they were just his own. "Whose then? Your master's?" she asked. He coloured deeper, with a different feeling, muttered an oath, and turned away. "Who is his master?" continued the tiresome girl, appealing to me. "He talked about our house and our folk. I thought he had been the owner's son, and he never said miss. He should have done, shouldn't he, if he's a servant?" Hareton grew black as a thundercloud at this childish speech. I suddenly shook my question, and at last succeeded in equipping her for departure. "Now get my horse," she said, addressing her new kinsman as she would one of the stable boys at a crunch, "and you may come with me. I want to see where the goblin hunter rises in the marsh, and to hear about the fairies, as he calls them. But make haste. What's the matter? Get my horse, I say." "I'll see thee down before I be thy servant," growled the lad. "You'll see me what?" asked Catherine in surprise. "Down, thou saucy witch," he replied. "There, Miss Cathy, you see I have got into pretty company," I interposed. "Nice words to be used to a young lady. Pray don't begin to dispute with him. Come, let us seek for me ourselves, and be gone." "But, Ellen," cried she, staring fixed in astonishment, "how dare you speak so to me? Wasn't to be made to do as I asked him? You wicked creature, I shall tell Papa what you said. Now then." Hareton did not appear to feel these threats, so the tears sprang into her eyes with indignation. "You bring the pony," she exclaimed, turning to the woman, "and let my dog free this moment." "Softly, miss," answered she, addressed. "You lose nothing by being civil. Though Mr. Hareton there be not the master's son, he's your cousin, and I was never hired to serve you." "He my cousin!" cried Cathy with a scornful laugh. "Yes, indeed," responded her approver. "Oh, Ellen, don't let them such things," pursued Red Crabbe. "Papa is gone to fetch my cousin from London. My cousin is a gentleman's son. That my—" She stopped and wept outright, upset at the bare notion of relationship with such a clown. "Hush, hush," I whispered. "People can have many cousins and of all sorts, Miss Cathy, without being any the worse for it. Only they needn't keep their company. They be disagreeable and bad." He's not my cousin, Ellen," she went on, gathering fresh grief from reflection, and flinging herself into my arms for a refuge from the idea. I was much vexed at her and the servant for their mutual revelations, having no doubt of Linton's approaching arrival, communicated by the former, being reported to Mr. Heathcliff, and feeling as confident that Catherine's first thought on her father's return would be to seek an explanation of the latter's assertion concerning her rude-bred kindred. Hareton, recovering from his disgust at being taken for a servant, seemed moved by her distress, and having fetched the pony round to the door, he took to propitiate her a fine crook-legged terrier whelped from the kennel, and, putting it into her hand, bid a whist for an immense note. Pausing in her lamentations, she surveyed him with a glance of awe and horror, then burst forth anew. I could scarcely refrain from smiling at his antipathy to the poor fellow, who was a well-made, athletic youth, good-looking in features, and stout and healthy, but attired in garments befitting his daily occupations of working on the farm and lounging along the moors after rabbits and game. Still, I thought I could detect in his physiognomy a mind owning better qualities than his father ever possessed. Good things lost amid a wilderness of weeds, to be sure, whose rankness far overtopped the neglected growth, and yet notwithstanding evidence of a wealthy soil that might yield luxuriant crops under other unfavourable circumstances. Mr. Heathcliff, I believe, had not treated him physically ill, thanks to his fearless nature, which offered no temptation into that curse of oppression. He had none of the timid susceptibility that would have given zest to ill treatment, in Heathcliff's judgment. He appeared to have bent his malevolence on making him a brute. He was never taught to read or write, never rebuked for any bad habit which did not annoy his keeper, never led a single step towards virtue, or guided by a single precept against vice. And, from what I heard, Joseph contributed much to his deterioration, by a narrow-minded partiality which prompted him to flatter and pet him as a boy, because he was at the head of the old family, and as he had been in the habit of accusing Catherine Earnshaw and Heathcliff, when children, of putting the master past his patience, and compelling him to seek solace in drink by what he termed their awful ways, so at present he laid the whole burden of Hareton's faults on the shoulders of the usurper of his papa. If the lad swore, he wouldn't correct him, nor however culpably he behaved. It gave Joseph satisfaction, apparently, to watch him go the worst length. He allowed that the lad was ruined, that his soul was abandoned to perdition, but then he reflected that Heathcliff must answer for it. Hareton's blood would be required at his hands, and there lay immense consolation in that thought. Joseph had instilled into him a pride of name, and of his lineage. He would, had he dared, have fostered hate between him and the present owner of the heights, but his dread of that owner mounted to superstition, and he confined his feelings regarding him to much innuendos and private combinations. Now I don't pretend to be intimately acquainted with the mode of living customary in those days at Wuthering Heights. I only speak from hearsay, for I saw little. The villagers affirmed Mr. Heathcliff was near, and a cruel hard landlord to his tenants. But the house inside had regained its ancient aspect of comfort and of female management, and the scenes of riot common in English time were not now enacted within its walls. The master was too gloomy to seek companionship with any people, good or bad, and he is yet. This, however, is not making progress with my story. Miss Cathy rejected the peace offering of the terrier, and demanded her own dogs, Charlie and Phoenix. They came limping and hanging their heads, and we set out for home, sadly out of sorts, every one of us. I couldn't wring from my little lady how she had spent the day, except that, as I supposed, the goal of her pilgrimage was Penistone Crags, and she arrived without adventure to the gate of the farmhouse, when Hareton happened to issue forth, attended by some canine followers who attacked her train. They had a smart battle before their owners could separate them. That formed the introduction. Catherine told Hareton who she was and where she was going, and asked him to show her the way, finally beguiling him to accompany her. He opened the mysteries of the fairy cave and 20 other queer places, but being in disgrace was not favoured with the description of the interesting objects he saw. I could gather, however, that her guide had been a favourite till she hurt his feelings by addressing him as a servant, and Heathcliff's housekeeper hurt hers by calling him her cousin, though the language he had held to her rankled in her heart. She, who was always love and darling and queen and angel with everybody at the Grange, to be insulted so shockingly by a stranger. I did not comprehend it, and Hardworker had to obtain a promise that she would not lay the grievance before her father. I explained how he objected to the whole household at the Heights, and how sorry he would be to find she had been there. But I insisted most on the fact that if she revealed my negligence of his orders, he would perhaps be so angry that I should have to leave, and Cathy couldn't bear that prospect. She pledged her word, and kept it for my sake. After all, she was a sweet little girl. End of chapter 18.
Chapter 19 of Wuthering Heights. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Peter. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Chapter 19. A letter, edged with black, announced the day of my master's return. Isabella was dead, and he wrote to bid me get mourning for his daughter, and arrange a room and other accommodations for his youthful nephew. Catherine ran wild with joy at the idea of welcoming her father back, and indulged most sanguine anticipations of the innumerable excellencies of her real cousin. The evening of their expected arrival came. Since early morning she had been busy ordering her own small affairs, and now attired in her new black frock, poor thing, her aunt's death impressed her with no definite sorrow, she obliged me, by constant worrying, to walk with her down through the grounds to meet them. "Linton is just 6 months younger than I am," she chattered, as we strolled leisurely over the swells and hollows of mossy turf, under shadow of the trees. "How delightful it will be to have him for a playfellow! Aunt Isabella sent Papa a beautiful lock of his hair. It was lighter than mine, more flaxen, and quite as fine. I have it carefully preserved in a little glass box, and I have often thought what a pleasure it would be to see its owner. Oh, I am happy! And Papa, dear, dear Papa! Come, Ellen, let us run! Come, run!" She ran, and returned and ran again, many times before my sober footsteps reached the gate, and then she seated herself on the grassy bank beside the path, and tried to wait patiently. But that was impossible. She couldn't be still a minute. "How long they are!" she exclaimed. "Ah, I see, some dust on the road. They are coming. No. When will they be here? May we not go a little way, 1/2 a mile, Ellen, only just 1/2 a mile? Do say yes, to that clump of birches at the turn." I refused staunchly. At length their suspense was ended. The travelling carriage rolled in sight. Miss Cathy shrieked and stretched out her arms, as soon as she caught her father's face looking from the window. He descended, nearly as eager as herself, and a considerable interval elapsed ere they had a thought to spare for any but themselves. While they exchanged caresses, I took a peep in to see after Linton. He was asleep in a corner, wrapped in a warm, fur-lined cloak, as if it had been winter. A pale, delicate, effeminate boy, who might have been taken for my master's younger brother, so strong was the resemblance, but there was a sickly peevishness in his aspect that Edgar Linton never had. The latter saw me looking, and having shaken hands, advised me to close the door, and leave him undisturbed, for the journey had fatigued him. Cathy would fain have taken one glance, but her father told her to come, and they walked together up the park, while I hastened before to prepare the servants. "Now, darling," said Mr. Linton, addressing his daughter, as they halted at the bottom of the front steps, "your cousin is not so strong or so merry as you are, and he has lost his mother, remember, a very short time since. Therefore, don't expect him to play and run about with you directly, and don't harass him much by talking. Let him be quiet this evening, at least, will you?" "Yes, yes, papa," answered Catherine. "But I do want to see him, and he hasn't once looked out." The carriage stopped, and the sleeper being roused, was lifted to the ground by his uncle. "This is your cousin Cathy, Linton," he said, putting their little hands together. "She's fond of you already, and mind you don't grieve her by crying tonight. Try to be cheerful now, the travelling is at an end, and you have nothing to do but rest and amuse yourself as you please." "Let me go to bed, then," answered the boy, shrinking from Catherine's salute, and he put his fingers to remove incipient tears. "Come, come, there's a good child," I whispered, leading him in. "You'll make her weep too. See how sorry she is for you." I do not know whether it was sorrow for him, but his cousin put on as sad a countenance as himself, and returned to her father. All three entered and mounted the library, where tea was laid ready. I proceeded to remove Linton's cap and mantle, and placed him on a chair by the table, but he was no sooner seated than he began to cry afresh. My master inquired what was the matter. "I can't sit on a chair," sobbed the boy. "Go to the sofa, then, and Ellen shall bring you some tea," answered his uncle patiently. He had been greatly tried during the journey, I felt convinced, by his fretful ailing charge. Linton slowly trailed himself off and lay down. Cathy carried a footstool and her cup to his side. At first she sat silent, but that could not last. She had resolved to make a pet of her little cousin, as she would have him to be, and she commenced stroking his curls, and kissing his cheek, and offering him tea in her saucer, like a baby. This pleased him, for he was not much better. He dried his eyes, and lightened into a faint smile. "Oh, he'll do very well," said the master to me, after watching them a minute. "Very well, if we can keep him, Ellen. The company of a child of his own age will instill new spirit into him soon, and by wishing for strength, he'll gain it." "Aye, if we can keep him," I mused to myself, and sore misgivings came over me that there was slight hope of that. And then I thought, however will that weakling live at Wuthering Heights? Between his father and Hareton, what playmates and instructors they'll be. Our doubts were presently decided, even earlier than I expected. I had just taken the children upstairs, after tea was finished, and seen Linton asleep. He would not suffer me to leave him till that was the case. I had come down, and was standing by the table in the hall, lighting a bedroom candle for Mr. Edgar, when a maid stepped out of the kitchen, and informed me that Mr. Heathcliff's servant Joseph was at the door, and wished to speak with the master. "I shall ask him what he wants first," I said, in considerable trepidation. "A very unlikely hour to be troubling people, and the instant they have returned from a long journey. I don't think the master can see him." Joseph advanced through the kitchen as I uttered these words, and now presented himself in the hall. He was donned in his Sunday garments, with most sanctimonious and sourest face, and holding his hat in one hand and his stick in the other, he proceeded to clean his shoes on the mat. "Good evening, Joseph," I said, coldly. "What business brings you here tonight?" "It's Master Linton I might speak to," he answered, waving me disdainfully aside. "Mr. Linton is going to bed. Unless you have something particular to say, I'm sure he won't hear it now," I continued. "You had better sit down in there, and entrust your message to me." "Which is his room?" pursued the fellow, surveying the range of closed doors. I perceived he was bent on refusing my mediation, so very reluctantly I went up to the library, and announced the unseasonable visitor, advising that he should be dismissed till next day. Mr. Linton had no time to empower me to do so, for Joseph mounted close at my heels, and pushing into the apartment, planted himself at the far side of the table, with his two fists clapped on the head of his stick, and began in an elevated tone, as if anticipating opposition. "Heathcliff has sent me for his lad, and I mun't go back about him." Edgar Linton was silent a minute, an expression of exceeding sorrow overcast his features. He would have pitied the child on his own account, but, recalling Isabella's hopes and fears, and anxious wishes for her son, and her commendations of him to his care, he grieved bitterly at the prospect of yielding him up, and searched in his heart how it might be avoided. No plan offered itself. The very exhibition of any desire to keep him would have rendered the claimant more peremptory. There was nothing left but to resign him. However, he was not going to rouse him from his sleep. "Tell Mr. Heathcliff," he answered calmly, "that his son shall come to Wuthering Heights tomorrow. He is in bed and too tired to go the distance now. You may also tell him that the mother of Linton desired him to remain under my guardianship, and, at present, his health is very precarious." "No," said Joseph, giving a thud with his prop on the floor, and assuming an authoritative air. "No, that means nought. Heathcliff makes no account to mother, nor you know that. But he'll his lad, and I mun take him, so now you know." "You shall not tonight," answered Linton decisively. "Walk downstairs at once and repeat to your master what I have said. Ellen, show him down. Go!" And, aiding the indignant elder with a lift by the arm, he rid the room of him and closed the door. "Very well," shouted Joseph, as he slowly drew off. "Tomorrow he's coming himself, and trust him now, if you dare." End of chapter 19 of Wuthering Heights.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Maria Tafidis. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Chapter 20. To obviate the danger of this threat being fulfilled, Mr. Linton commissioned me to take the boy home early, on Catherine's pony. "And," said he, "as we shall now have no influence over his destiny, good or bad, we must say nothing of where he is gone to my daughter. She cannot associate with him hereafter, and it is better for her to remain in ignorance of his proximity, lest she should be restless and anxious to visit the Heights. Merely tell her his father sent for him suddenly, and he has been obliged to leave us." Linton was very reluctant to be roused from his bed at 5 o'clock, and astonished to be informed that he must prepare for further travelling. But I softened half the matter by stating that he was going to spend some time with his father, Mr. Heathcliff, who wished to see him so much, I did not like to defer the pleasure till he should recover from his late journey. "My father?" he cried in strange perplexity. "Mamma never told me I had a father. Where does he live? I'd rather stay with uncle." "He lives a little distance from the Grange," I replied. "Just beyond those hills. Not so far, but you may walk over here when you get hearty. And you should be glad to go home and to see him. You must try to love him as you did your mother, and then he will love you." "But why have I never heard of him before?" asked Linton. "Why didn't Mamma and he live together as other people do?" "They had business to keep him in the north," I answered, "and your mother's health required her to reside in the south." "And why didn't Mamma speak to me about him?" persevered the child. "She often talked of uncle, and I learned to love him long ago. How am I to love Papa? I don't know him." "Oh, all children love their parents," I said. "Your mother perhaps thought you would want to be with him if she mentioned him often to you. Let us make haste. An early ride on such a beautiful morning is much preferable to an hour's more sleep." "And is she to go with us?" demanded the little girl I saw yesterday. "Not now," replied I. "Is uncle?" he continued. "No, I shall be your companion there," I said. Linton sank back on his pillow and fell into a brown study. "I won't go without uncle," he cried at length. "May I come tell where you mean to take me?" I attempted to persuade him of the naughtiness of showing reluctance to meet his father. Still he obstinately resisted any progress towards Jessie, and I had to call for my master's assistance in coaxing him out of bed. The poor thing was finally got off, with several delusive assurances that his absence should be short, that Mr. Edgar and Cathy would visit him, and other promises, equally ill-founded, which I invented and reiterated at intervals throughout the way. The pure heather-scented air, the bright sunshine, and the general canter of Minnie relieved his despondency after a while. He began to put questions concerning his new home and its inhabitants with greater interest and liveliness. "Is Wuthering Heights as pleasant a place as Thrushcross Grange?" he inquired, turning to take a last glance into the valley, whence a light mist mounted and formed a fleecy cloud on the skirts of the blue. "It's not so buried in trees," I replied. "It's not quite so large, but you can see the country beautifully all around, and the air is healthier for you, fresher and drier. You will, perhaps, think the building old and dark at first, though it is a respectable house, the next best in the neighbourhood, and you will have such nice rambles on the moors. Catherine Earnshaw, that is Miss Cathy's other cousin, and so yours, in manner, We'll show you all the sweetest spots, and you can bring a book in fine weather and make a green hollow your study. Now and then your uncle may join you in a walk. He does frequently walk out on the hills." "When was my father like?" he asked. "Is he as young and handsome as uncle?" "He's as young," said I, "but he has black hair and eyes, and looks sterner, and he's taller and bigger altogether. He'll not seem to you so gentle and kind at first, perhaps, because it is not his way. Still, mind you, be frank and cordial with him, and naturally he'll be fonder of you than any uncle, for you are his own." "Black hair and eyes," mused Linton. "I can't fancy him. Then I am not like him, am I?" "Not much," I answered. Not more so, I thought, surveying with regret the white complexion and slim frame of my companion, and his large languid eyes, his mother's eyes, so that unless a morbid touchiness kindled them a moment, they had not a vestige of a sparkling spirit. "How strange that he should never come to see Mamma and me," he murmured. "Has he even seen me? If he has, I must have been a baby. I remember not a single thing about him." "Why, Master Linton," said I, 300 miles is a great distance, and 10 years seem very different in length to a grown-up person, compared with what they do to you. It is probable Mr. Heathcliff proposed going from summer to summer, but never found a convenient opportunity, and now it is too late, and troubled him with questions on the subject, to disturb him for no good." The boy was fully occupied with his own cogitations for the remainder of the ride, till we halted before the farmhouse garden gate. I watched to catch his impressions in his countenance. He surveyed the carved front and low browed lattices, the straggling gooseberry bushes and crooked firs, with solemn intentness, and then shook his head. His private feelings entirely disapproved of the exterior of his new abode. But he had sense to postpone complaining, and there might be compensation within. Before he dismounted, I went and opened the door. It was 6:30. The family had just finished breakfast, and the servant was clearing and wiping down at the table. Joseph stood by his master's chair, telling some tale concerning a lame horse, and Hareton was preparing for the hayfield. "Hello, Nelly," said Mr. Heathcliff when suddenly. "I feared I should have to come down and fetch my property myself. You've brought it, have you? Let's see what you can make of it." He got up and strode to the door. Hareton and Joseph followed in gaping curiosity. Poor Linton ran a frightened eye over the faces of the three. "Surely," said Joseph, after a grave inspection, "he's swapped wi' Maister, and yon his lass." Heathcliff, having stared his son into an ague of confusion, uttered a scornful laugh. "Gad, what a beauty! What a lovely, charming thing!" he exclaimed. "Haven't they reared in snail and sour milk, Nelly? Oh, damn a soul, but that's worse than I expected. The devil knows I was not sanguine." I bid the trembling and bewildered child get down and enter. He did not thoroughly comprehend the meaning of his father's speech, or whether it portended for him. Indeed, he was not yet certain that the grim, sneering stranger was his father. But he clung to me with a growing trepidation, and on Mr. Heathcliff taking the seat and bidding him come hither, he hid his face on my shoulder and wept. "Tut, tut," said Heathcliff, stretching out a hand and dragging him roughly between his knees, and then holding up his head bearded cheek. "None of that nonsense. You're not going to hurt thee, Linton, isn't that thy name? Thou art thy mother's child entirely. Where is my share in thee, puling chicken?" He took off the boy's cap and pushed back his thick flaxen curls, felt his slender arms and his small fingers, during which examination Linton ceased crying and looked in his great blue eyes to inspect the inspector. "Do you know me?" asked Heathcliff, having satisfied himself that the limbs were all equally frail and feeble. "No," said Linton, with a gaze of vacant fear. "You've heard of me, I dare say?" "No," he replied again. "No! What a shame of your mother never to awaken you feel a regard for me. You are my son, then, I'll tell you. That your mother was a wicked slut, to leave you in ignorance of the sort of father you possessed. No, don't wince and colour up, though it is something to see you have not white blood. Be a good lad, and I'll do for you. Now, if you be tired, you may sit down and not get home again. I guess you'll report what you hear and see to the cipher at the Grange. Really, the thing won't be settled while you linger about it." Well, replied I, hope you'll be kind to the boy, Mr. Heathcliff, or do not keep him long, and he's all you have kin in the wide world that will ever know, remember. I'll be very kind to him, you needn't fear, he said, laughing. Only nobody else must be kind to him. I'm jealous of monopolizing his affection. To begin, my kindness, Joseph, bring the lad some breakfast. Hareton, you infernal calf, begone to your work. Yes, Nell, he added when they had departed, my son is prospective owner of your place, and I should not wish him to die till I was certain of being his successor. Besides, he's mine, and I want the triumph of seeing my descendant fairly lord of their estates, my child harrying their children to till their father's lands for wages. That is the sole consideration which can make me endure the whelp. I despise him for himself, and hate him for the memories he derives. That consideration is sufficient. He is as safe with me, and shall be tended as carefully as you must tend his own. I have a room upstairs furnished for him in a handsome style. I will get a tutor also to come 3 times a week, from 20 miles distance, to teach him what he pleases to learn. I have ordered Hareton to obey him, and in fact, I have arranged everything with a view to preserving the superior and the gentleman in him above his associates. I do regret, however, that he so little deserves the trouble. If I wished any blessing in the world, just to find him a worthy object of pride, then I am bitterly disappointed with the way-faced whining wretch. When he was speaking, Joseph returned bearing a basin of milk porridge and placed it before Linton, who stirred round the homely mess with a look of aversion. The firm could not eat it. I saw the old man's servant share largely his master's scorn of the child, though he was compelled to retain the sentiment in his heart because Heathcliff plainly meant his underlings to hold him in honour. Cannot aid it, repeated he, peering in Linton's face and subduing his voice to whisper for fear of being overheard. But Master Hareton never ate naught else when he were a little on, and what were good enough for him's good enough for ye's, rather think. I shan't eat it, answered Linton snappishly. Take it away. Joseph snatched up the food indignantly and bore it us. Is there old ale stickles? He asked, thrusting the tray under Heathcliff's nose. What should ail them? He said. Well, said Joseph, yon dainty chap says he cannot eat them, but I guess it's right. His mother were just so. We're almost too mucky to soak corn for making her bread. Don't mention his mother to me, said the master angrily. Get him something we can eat, that's all. What is his usual food, Nelly? I suggested boiled milk or tea, and the housekeeper received instructions to prepare some. Come, I reflect, his father's selfishness may contribute to his comfort. He perceives his delicate constitution and the necessity of treating him tolerably. I will console Mr. Eddy by acquainting him with the turn Heathcliff's humour has taken. Having no excuse for lingering longer, I slipped out, while Linton was engaged in timidly rebuffing the advances of a friendly sheepdog. But he was too much on the alert to be cheated. As I closed the door, I heard a cry in a frantic repetition of the words, "Don't leave me! I must stay here! I must stay here!" But the latch was raised and fell. They did not suffer him to come forth. I mounted Minnie and urged her to retract. And so my brief guardianship ended. End of chapter 20.
Chapter 21 of Wuthering Heights. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Crandall. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Chapter 21. We had sad work with little Cathy that day. She rose in high glee, eager to join her cousin, and such passionate tears and lamentations followed the news of his departure that Edgar himself was obliged to soothe her by affirming he should come back soon. He added, however, "if I can get him," and there were no hopes of that. This promise poorly pacified her, but time was more potent, and though still at intervals she inquired of her father when Linton would return, before she did see him again his features had waxed so dim in her memory that she did not recognize him. When I chanced to encounter the housekeeper of Wuthering Heights in paying business visits to Grimmerton, I used to ask how the young master got on, for he lived almost as secluded as Catherine herself, and was never to be seen. I could gather from her that he continued in weak health, and was a tiresome inmate. She said Mr. Heathcliff seemed to dislike him ever longer and worse, though he took some trouble to conceal it. He had an antipathy to the sound of his voice, could not do at all with his sitting in the same room with him many minutes together. There seldom passed much talk between them. Linton learned his lessons and spent his evenings in a small apartment they called the parlour. Or else he lay in bed all day, for he was constantly getting coughs and colds and aches and pains of some sort. "And I never know such a faint-hearted creature," added the woman, "nor one so careful of himself. He will go on if I leave the window open a bit late in the evening. Oh, it's killing a breath of the night air. And he must have a fire in the middle of summer, and Joseph's bacca-pipe is poison, and he must always have sweets and dainties, and always milk for ever, heeding not how the rest of us are pinched in winter. And there he'll sit, wrapped in his furred cloak, in his chair by the fire, with some toast and water, or other slop on the hob to sip at, and if Hareton, for pity, comes to amuse him, Hareton is not bad-natured, though he's rough. They're sure to part, one swearing and the other crying. I believe the master would relish Earnshaw's thrashing him to a mummy, if he were not his son. And I'm certain he would be fit to turn him out of doors, if he knew half the nursing he gives his son. But then he won't go into danger of temptation. He never enters the parlour, and should Linton show those ways in the house where he is, he sends him upstairs directly." I divined from this account that utter lack of sympathy had rendered young Heathcliff selfish and disagreeable, if he were not so originally, and my interest in him consequently decayed, though still I was moved with a sense of grief at his lot, and a wish that he had been left with us. Mr. Edgar encouraged me to gain information. He thought a great deal about him, I fancy, and would have run some risk to see him, and he told me once to ask the housekeeper whether he ever came into the village. She said he had only been twice, on horseback, accompanying his father, and both times he pretended to be quite knocked up for 3 or 4 days afterwards. The housekeeper left, if I recollect rightly, 2 years after he came, and another, whom I did not know, was her successor. She lives there still. Time wore on at the Grange in its former pleasant way till Miss Cathy reached 16. On the anniversary of her birth we never manifested any signs of rejoicing, because it was also the anniversary of my late mistress's death. Her father invariably spent that day alone in the library, and walked at dusk as far as Gimmerton kirkyard, where he would frequently prolong his stay beyond midnight. Therefore Catherine was thrown on her own resources for amusement. This 20th of March was a beautiful spring day, and when her father had retired, my young lady came down dressed for going out, and said she asked to have a ramble on the edge of the moor with me. Mr. Linton had given her leave, if we went only a short distance and were back within the hour. "So make haste, Ellen," she cried. "I know where I wish to go, where a colony of moor game are settled. I want to see whether they have made their nests yet." "That must be a good distance up," I answered. "They don't breed on the edge of the moor." "No, it's not," she said. "I've gone very near with papa." I put on my bonnet, and sallied out, thinking nothing more of the matter. She bounded before me, and returned to my side, and was off again like a young greyhound. And at first I found plenty of entertainment in listening to the larks singing far and near, and enjoying the sweet warm sunshine, and watching her, my pet and my delight, with her golden ringlets flying loose behind, and her bright cheek, as soft and pure in its bloom as a wild rose, and her eyes radiant with cloudless pleasure. She was a happy creature, and an angel in those days. It's a pity she could not be content. "Well," said I, "where are your moor game, Miss Cathy? We should be at them. The Grange Park fence is a great way off now." "Oh, a little further, only a little further, Ellen," was her answer, continually. "Climb to that hillock, pass the bank, and by the time you reach the other side I shall have raised the birds." But there were so many hillocks and banks to climb and pass, that at length I began to be weary, and told her we must halt, and retrace our steps. I shouted to her, as she had outstripped me a long way. She either did not hear or did not regard, for she still sprang on, and I was compelled to follow. Finally she dived into a hollow, and before I came in sight of her again, she was 2 miles nearer Wuthering Heights than her own home, and I beheld a couple of persons arrest her, one of whom I felt convinced was Mr. Heathcliff himself. Cathy had been caught in the fact of plundering, or, at least, hunting out the nests of the grouse. The Heights were Heathcliff's land, and he was reproving the poacher. "I've neither taken any nor found any," she said, as I toiled to them, expanding her hands in corroboration of the statement. "I didn't mean to take them, but papa told me there were quantities up here, and I wished to see the eggs." Heathcliff glanced at me with an ill-meaning smile, expressing his acquaintance with the party, and consequently his malevolence toward it, and demanded who "papa" was. "Mr. Linton of Thrushcross Grange," she replied. "I thought you did not know me, or you wouldn't have spoken in that way." "You suppose papa is highly esteemed and respected, then?" he said sarcastically. "And what are you?" inquired Catherine, gazing curiously on the speaker. "That man I've seen before. Is he your son?" She pointed to Hareton, the other individual, who had gained nothing but increased bulk and strength by the addition of 2 years to his age. He seemed as awkward and rough as ever. "Miss Cathy," I interrupted, "it will be 3 hours instead of 1 that we are out presently. We really must go back." "No, that man is not my son," answered Heathcliff, pushing me aside. "But I have one, and you have seen him before too. And though your nurse is in a hurry, I think both you and she would be better for a little rest. Will you just turn this nab of heath, and walk into my house? You'll get home earlier for the ease, and you shall receive a kind welcome." I whispered Catherine that she mustn't, on any account, accede to the proposal. It was entirely out of the question. "Why?" she asked aloud. "I'm tired of running, and the ground is dewy. I can't sit here. Let us go, Ellen. Besides, he says I have seen his son. He's mistaken, I think, but I guess where he lives, at the farmhouse I visited in coming from Penistone Crags. Don't you?" "I do. Come, Nelly, hold your tongue. It will be a treat for her to look in on us. Hareton, get forwards at the lass. You shall walk with me, Nelly." "No, she's not going to any such place," I cried, struggling to release my arm, which he had seized. But she was almost at the door-stones already, scampering round the brow at full speed. Her appointed companion did not pretend to escort her. He shied off by the roadside and vanished. "Mr. Heathcliff, it's very wrong," I continued. "You know you mean no good, and there she'll see Linton, and all will be told as soon as ever we return, and I shall have the blame." "I want her to see Linton," he answered. "He's looking better these few days. It's not often he's fit to be seen, and will soon persuade her to keep the visit secret. Where is the harm of it?" "The harm of it is, that her father would hate me if he found out I suffered her to enter your house, and I am convinced you have a bad design in encouraging her to do so," I replied. "My design is as honest as possible. I'll inform you of its whole scope," he said, "that the 2 cousins may fall in love and get married. I'm acting generously to your master. His young chit has no expectations, and should she second my wishes, she'll be provided for at once as joint successor with Linton." "If Linton died," I answered, "and his life is quite uncertain, Catherine would be the heir." "No, she would not," he said. "There is no clause in the will to secure it so. His property would go to me, but, to prevent disputes, I desire their union, and am resolved to bring it about." "And I'm resolved she shall never approach your house with me again," I returned, as we reached the gate where Miss Cathy waited our coming. Heathcliff bade me be quiet, and, preceding us up the path, hastened to open the door. My young lady gave him several looks, as if she could not exactly make up her mind what to think of him. But now he smiled when he met her eye, and softened his voice in addressing her. And I was foolish enough to imagine the memory of her mother might disarm him from desiring her injury. Linton stood on the hearth. He had been out walking in the fields, for his cap was on, and he was calling to Joseph to bring him dry shoes. He had grown tall of his age, still wanting some months of 16. His features were pretty yet, and his eye and complexion brighter than I remembered them, though with merely temporary lustre borrowed from the salubrious air and genial sun. "Now who is that?" asked Mr. Heathcliff, turning to Cathy. "Can you tell?" "Your son?" she said, having doubtfully surveyed first one and then the other. "Yes, yes," answered he. "But is this the only time you have beheld him? Think. Ah, you have a short memory. Linton, don't you recall your cousin that you used to tease us so with wishing to see?" "What, Linton?" cried Cathy, kindling into joyful surprise at the name. "Is that little Linton? He's taller than I am. Are you Linton?" The youth stepped forward and acknowledged himself. She kissed him fervently, and they gazed with wonder at the change time had brought in the appearance of each. Catherine had reached her full height. Her figure was both plump and slender, elastic as steel, and her whole aspect sparkling with health and spirits. Linton's looks and movements were very languid, and his form extremely slight. But there was a grace in his manner that mitigated these defects. and rendered him not unpleasing. After exchanging numerous marks of fondness with him, his cousin went to Mr. Heathcliff, who lingered by the door, dividing his attention between the objects inside and those that lay without, pretending, that is, to observe the latter, and really noting the former alone. "And you are my uncle, then?" she cried, reaching up to salute him. "I thought I liked you, though you were cross at first. Why don't you visit at the Grange with Linton? To live all these years such close neighbours, and never see us, is odd. What have you done so for?" "I visited it once or twice too often before you were born," he answered. "There, damn it, if you have any kisses to spare, give them to Linton. They are thrown away on me." "Naughty Ellen!" exclaimed Catherine, flying to attack me next with her lavish caresses. "Wicked Ellen, to try to hinder me from entering! But I'll take this walk every morning in the future. May I, uncle, and sometimes bring papa? Won't you be glad to see us?" "Of course," replied the uncle, with a hardly suppressed grimace, resulting from his deep aversion to both the proposed visitors. "But stay," he continued, turning towards the young lady. "Now I think of it, I'd better tell you. Mr. Linton has a prejudice against me. We quarrelled at one time of our lives, with unchristian ferocity, and if you mention coming here to him, he'll put a veto on your visits altogether. Therefore you must not mention it, unless you be careless of seeing your cousin hereafter. You may come if you will, but you must not mention it." "Why did you quarrel?" asked Catherine, considerably crestfallen. "He thought me too poor to wed his sister," answered Heathcliff, "and was grieved that I got her. His pride was hurt, and he'll never forgive it." "That's wrong," said the young lady. "Some time I'll tell him so. But Linton and I have no share in your quarrel. I'll not come here then. He shall come to the Grange." "It will be too far for me," murmured her cousin. "To walk 4 miles would kill me. No, come here, Miss Catherine, now and then, not every morning, but once or twice a week." The father launched towards his son a glance of bitter contempt. "I am afraid, Nelly, I shall lose my labour," he muttered to me. "Miss Catherine, as the ninny calls her, will discover his value, and send him to the devil. Now, if it had been Hareton! Do you know that 20 times a day I covet Hareton with all his degradation? I'd have loved the lad had he been some one else, but I think he's safe from her love. I'll pit him against that paltry creature, unless it bestir itself briskly. We calculate it will scarcely last till it is 18. Oh, confound the vapid thing! He's absorbed in drying his feet, and never looks at her. Linton!" "Yes, father," answered the boy. "Have you nothing to show your cousin anywhere about? Not even a rabbit or a weasel's nest? Take her into the garden before you change your shoes, and into the stable to see your horse." "Wouldn't you rather sit here?" asked Linton, addressing Cathy, in a tone which expressed reluctance to move again. "I don't know," she replied, casting a longing look to the door, and evidently eager to be active. He kept his seat, and shrank closer to the fire. Heathcliff rose, and went into the kitchen, and from thence to the yard, calling out for Hareton. Hareton responded, and presently the two re-entered. The young man had been washing himself, as was visible by the glow on his cheeks and his wetted hair. "Oh, I'll ask you, uncle," cried Miss Cathy, recollecting the housekeeper's assertion. "That is not my cousin, is he?" "Yes, he is," he replied, "your mother's nephew." "Don't you like him?" Catherine looked queer. "Is he not a handsome lad?" he continued. The uncivil little thing stood on tiptoe, and whispered a sentence in Heathcliff's ear. He laughed. Hareton darkened. I perceived he was very sensitive to suspected slights, and had obviously a dim notion of his inferiority. But his master or guardian chased the frown by exclaiming, "You'll be favourite among us, Hareton. She says you are a what was it? Well, something very flattering. Here, you go with her round the farm, and behave like a gentleman, mind. Don't use any bad words, and don't stare when the young lady is not looking at you, and be ready to hide your face when she is. And, when you speak, say your words slowly, and keep your hands out of your pockets. Be off, and entertain her as nicely as you can." He watched the couple walking past the window. Earnshaw had his countenance completely averted from his companion. He seemed studying the familiar landscape with a stranger's and an artist's interest. Catherine took a sly look at him, expressing small admiration. She then turned her attention to seeking out objects of amusement for herself, and tripped merrily on, lilting a tune to supply the lack of conversation. "I've tied his tongue," observed Heathcliff. "He'll not venture a single syllable all the time. Nelly, you recollect me at his age. nay, some years younger. Did I ever look so stupid, so gomless, as Joseph calls it? Worse, I replied, because more sullen with it. I've a pleasure in him, he continued, reflecting aloud. He has satisfied my expectations. If he were a born fool, I should not enjoy it half so much. But he's no fool, and I can sympathize with all his feelings, having felt them myself. I know what he suffers now, for instance, exactly. It is merely a beginning of what he shall suffer, though. He'll never be able to emerge from his bathos of coarseness and ignorance. I've got him faster than his scoundrel of a father secured me, and lower, for he takes a pride in his brutishness. I've taught him to scorn everything extra-animal as silly and weak. Don't you think Heinley would be proud of his son if he could see him? Almost as proud as I am of mine. But there's this difference. One is gold put to the use of paving stones, and the other is tin polished to ape a service of silver. Mine has nothing valuable about it, yet I shall have the merit of making it go as far as such poor stuff can go. His had first-rate qualities, and they are lost, rendered worse than unavailing. I have nothing to regret. He would have more than any but I are aware of it. And the best of it is, Hareton is damnably fond of me. You'll own that I've outmatched Heinley there. If the dead villain could rise from his grave to abuse me for his offspring's wrongs, I should have the fun of seeing the said offspring fight him back again, indignant that he should dare to rail at the one friend he has in the world. Heathcliff chuckled a fiendish laugh at the idea. I made no reply, because I saw that he expected none. Meantime our young companion, who sat too removed from us to hear what was said, began to evince symptoms of uneasiness, probably repenting that he had denied himself the treat of Catherine's society, for fear of a little fatigue. His father remarked the restless glances wandering to the window, and the hand irresolutely extended towards his cap. "Get up, you idle boy!" he exclaimed with assumed heartiness. "Away after them! They are just at the corner, by the stand of hives." Linton gathered his energies and left the hearth. The lattice was open, and as he stepped out, I heard Cathy inquiring of her unsociable attendant what was that inscription over the door. Hareton stared up and scratched his head like a true clown. "It's some damnable writing," he answered. "I cannot read it." "Can't read it?" cried Catherine. "I can read it. It's English. But I want to know why it's there." Linton giggled, the first appearance of mirth he had exhibited. "He does not know his letters," he said to his cousin. "Could you believe in the existence of such a colossal dunce?" "Is he all as he should be?" asked Miss Cathy seriously. "Or is he simple? Not right. I've questioned him twice now, and each time he looks so stupid I think he does not understand me. I can hardly understand him, I'm sure." Linton repeated his laugh, and glanced at Hareton tauntingly, who certainly did not seem quite clear of comprehension at that moment. "There is nothing the matter but laziness, is there, Earnshaw?" he said. "My cousin fancies you are an idiot. There you experience the consequences of scorning book-larning, as you would say. Have you noticed, Catherine, his frightful Yorkshire pronunciation?" "Why, where the devil is the use on't?" growled Hareton, more ready in answering his daily companion. He was about to enlarge further, but the two youngsters broke into a noisy fit of merriment, my giddy miss being delighted to discover that she might turn his strange talk to a matter of amusement. "Where is the use of the devil in that sentence?" tittered Linton. "Papa told you not to say any bad words, and you can't open your mouth without one. Do try to behave like a gentleman. Now do." "If thou weren't more a lass than a lad, I'd fell thee this minute, I would, pitiful lath of a creature," retorted the angry boor, retreating, while his face burnt with mingled rage and mortification, for he was conscious of being insulted, and embarrassed how to resent it. Mr. Heathcliff, having overheard the conversation as well as I, smiled when he saw him go, but immediately afterwards cast a look of singular aversion on the flippant pair, who remained chattering in the doorway, the boy finding animation enough while discussing Hareton's faults and deficiencies, and relating anecdotes of his goings-on, and the girl relishing his pert and spiteful sayings, without considering the ill nature they evinced. I began to dislike, more than to compassionate Linton, and to excuse his father in some measure for holding him cheap. We stayed till afternoon. I could not tear Miss Cathy away sooner, but happily my master had not quitted his apartment, and remained ignorant of our prolonged absence. As we walked home, I would fain have enlightened my charge on the characters of the people we had quitted, but she got it into her head that I was prejudiced against them. "Aha!" she cried, "you take papa's side, Ellen. You are partial, I know, or else you wouldn't have cheated me so many years into the notion that Linton lived a long way from here. I'm really extremely angry, only I'm so pleased I can't show it. But you must hold your tongue about my uncle. He's my uncle, remember, and I'll scold papa for quarrelling with him." And so she ran on till I relinquished the endeavour to convince her of her mistake. She did not mention the visit that night, because she did not see Mr. Linton. Next day it all came out, sadly to my chagrin, and still I was not altogether sorry. I thought the burden of directing and warning would be more efficiently borne by him than me, but he was too timid in giving satisfactory reasons for his wish that she should shun connection with the household of the Heights, and Catherine liked good reasons for every restraint that harassed her petted will. "Papa," she exclaimed, after the morning salutations, "guess whom I saw yesterday in my walk on the moors." "Ah, papa, you started. You've not done right, have you now? I saw, but listen, and you shall hear how I found you out, and Ellen, who is in league with you, and yet pretended to pity me so when I kept hoping, and was always disappointed about Linton's coming back." She gave a faithful account of her excursion and its consequences, and my master, though he cast more than one reproachful look at me, said nothing till she had concluded. Then he drew her to him, and asked if she knew why he had concealed Linton's near neighbourhood from her? Could she think it was to deny her a pleasure that she might harmlessly enjoy? "It was because you disliked Mr. Heathcliff," she answered. "Then you believe I care more for my own feelings than yours, Cathy?" he said. "No, it was not because I dislike Mr. Heathcliff, but because Mr. Heathcliff dislikes me, and is a most diabolical man, delighting to wrong and ruin those he hates, if they give him the slightest opportunity. I knew that you could not keep up an acquaintance with your cousin without being brought into contact with him, and I knew he would detest you on my account. So, for your own good, and nothing else, I took precautions that you should not see Linton again. I meant to explain this some time as you grew older, and I'm sorry I delayed it." "But Mr. Heathcliff was quite cordial, papa," observed Catherine, not at all convinced, "and he didn't object to our seeing each other. He said I might come to his house when I pleased, only I must not tell you, because you had quarrelled with him, and would not forgive him for marrying Aunt Isabella. And you won't. You are the one to be blamed. He is willing to let us be friends at least, Linton and I, and you are not." My master, perceiving that she would not take his word for her uncle-in-law's evil disposition, gave a hasty sketch of his conduct to Isabella, and the manner in which Wuthering Heights became his property. He could not bear to discourse long upon the topic, for though he spoke little of it, he still felt the same horror and detestation of his ancient enemy that had occupied his heart ever since Mrs. Linton's death. She might have been living yet if it had not been for him, was his constant bitter reflection, and in his eyes Heathcliff seemed a murderer. Miss Cathy, conversant with no bad deeds except her own slight acts of disobedience, injustice, and passion, arising from a hot temper and thoughtlessness, and repented of on the day they were committed, was amazed at the blackness of spirit that could brood on and cover revenge for years, and deliberately prosecute its plans without a visitation of remorse. She appeared so deeply impressed and shocked at this new view of human nature, excluded from all her studies and all her ideas till now, that Mr. Edgar deemed it unnecessary to pursue the subject. He merely added, "You will know hereafter, darling, why I wish you to avoid his house and family. Now return to your old employments and amusements, and think no more about them." Catherine kissed her father, and sat down quietly to her lessons for a couple of hours, according to custom. Then she accompanied him into the grounds, and the whole day passed as usual. But in the evening, when she had retired to her room, and I went to help her to undress, I found her crying, on her knees by the bedside. "Oh, fie, silly child!" I exclaimed. "If you had any real griefs, you'd be ashamed to waste a tear on this little contrariety. You never had one shadow of substantial sorrow, Miss Catherine. Suppose for a minute that master and I were dead, and you were by yourself in the world, how would you feel then? Compare the present occasion with such an affliction as that, and be thankful for the friends you have, instead of coveting more." "I'm not crying for myself, Ellen," she answered. "It's for him. He expected to see me again to-morrow, and there he'll be so disappointed, and he'll wait for me, and I shan't come." "Nonsense," said I. "Do you imagine he has thought as much of you as you have of him? Hasn't he Hareton for a companion? Not 1 in 100 would weep at losing a relation they had just seen twice, for 2 afternoons. Linton will conjecture how it is, and trouble himself no further about you." "But may I not write a note to tell him why I cannot come?" she asked, rising to her feet. "And just send those books I promised to lend him. His books are not as nice as mine, and he wanted to have them extremely when I told him how interesting they were. May I not, Ellen?" "No, indeed, no, indeed," I replied with decision. "Then he would write to you, and there'd never be an end of it. No, Miss Catherine, the acquaintance must be dropped entirely, so papa expects, and I shall see that it is done." "But how can one little note—" she recommenced, putting on an imploring countenance. "Silence!" I interrupted. "We'll not begin with your little notes. Get into bed." She threw me a very naughty look, so naughty that I would not kiss her good night at first. I covered her up and shut her door, in great displeasure. But, repenting halfway, I returned softly, and lo! there was Miss, standing at the table with a bit of blank paper before her and a pencil in her hand, which she guiltily slipped out of sight on my entrance. "You'll get nobody to take that, Catherine," I said, "if you write it, and at present I shall put out your candle." I set the extinguisher on the flame, receiving as I did so a slap on my hand and a petulant "cross thing." I then quitted her again, and she drew the bolt in one of her worst, most peevish humours. The letter was finished and forwarded to its destination by a milk fetcher who came from the village, but that I didn't learn till some time afterwards. Weeks passed on, and Cathy recovered her temper, though she grew wondrous fond of stealing off to corners by herself, and often, if I came near her suddenly while reading, she would start and bend over the book, evidently desirous to hide it, and I detected edges of loose paper sticking out beyond the leaves. She also got a trick of coming down early in the morning and lingering about the kitchen, as if she were expecting the arrival of something, and she had a small drawer in a cabinet in the library, which she would trifle over for hours, and whose key she took special care to remove when she left it. One day, as she inspected this drawer, I observed that the playthings and trinkets which recently formed its contents were transmuted into bits of folded paper. My curiosity and suspicions were roused. I determined to take a peep at her mysterious treasures. So at night, as soon as she and my master were safe upstairs, I searched, and readily found among my house keys one that would fit the lock. Having opened, I emptied the whole contents into my apron, and took them with me to examine at leisure in my own chamber. Though I could not but suspect, I was still surprised to discover that they were a mass of correspondence, daily almost it must have been, from Linton Heathcliff, answers to documents forwarded by her. The earlier dated were embarrassed and short. Gradually, however, they expanded into copious love letters, foolish, as the age of the writer rendered natural, yet with touches here and there which I thought were borrowed from a more experienced source. Some of them struck me as singularly odd compounds of ardour and flatness, commencing in strong feeling, and concluding in the affected, wordy style that a schoolboy might use to a fancied, incorporeal sweetheart. Whether they satisfied Cathy, I don't know, but they appeared very worthless trash to me. After turning over as many as I thought proper, I tied them in a handkerchief and set them aside, relocking the vacant drawer. Following her habit, my young lady descended early, and visited the kitchen. I watched her go to the door on the arrival of a certain little boy, and while the dairymaid filled his can, she tucked something into his jacket pocket, and plucked something out. I went round by the garden, and laid wait for the messenger, who fought valorously to defend his trust, and we spilt the milk between us. But I succeeded in abstracting the epistle, and, threatening serious consequences if he did not look sharp home, I remained under the wall, and perused Miss Cathy's affectionate composition. It was more simple and eloquent than her cousin's, very pretty and very silly. I shook my head, and went meditating into the house. The day being wet, she could not divert herself with rambling about the park, so, at the conclusion of her morning studies, she resorted to the solace of the drawer. Her father sat reading at the table, and I, on purpose, had sought a bit of work in some unripped fringes of the window curtain, keeping my eye steadily fixed on her proceedings. Never did any bird flying back to a plundered nest, which it had left brimful of chirping young ones, express more complete despair, in its anguished cries and flutterings, than she by her single "Oh!" and the change that transfigured her late happy countenance. Mr. Linton looked up. "What is the matter, love? Have you hurt yourself?" he said. His tone and look assured her he had not been the discoverer of the hoard. "No, papa," she gasped. "Ellen, Ellen, come upstairs. I'm sick." I obeyed her summons, and accompanied her out. "Oh, Ellen, you have got them?" she commenced immediately, dropping on her knees, when we were enclosed alone. "Oh, give them to me, and I'll never, never do so again. Don't tell papa. You have not told papa, Ellen? Say you have not. I've been exceedingly naughty, but I won't do it any more." With a grave severity in my manner, I bade her stand up. "So," I exclaimed, "Miss Catherine, you are tolerably far on, it seems. You may well be ashamed of them. A fine bundle of trash you study in your leisure hours, to be sure. Why, it's good enough to be printed. And what do you suppose the master will think when I display it before him? I haven't shown it yet, but you needn't imagine I shall keep your ridiculous secrets. For shame! And you must have led the way in writing such absurdities. He would not have thought of beginning, I'm certain." I didn't," sobbed Cathy, fit to break her heart. "I didn't once think of loving him till—" "Loving!" cried I, as scornfully as I could utter the word. "Loving! Did anybody ever hear the like? I might just as well talk of loving the miller who comes once a year to buy our corn. Pretty loving, indeed! And both times together you have seen Linton hardly 4 hours in your life. Now here is the babyish trash. I'm going with it to the library, and we'll see what your father says to such loving." She sprang at her precious epistles, but I held them above my head, and then she poured out further frantic entreaties that I would burn them, do anything rather than show them. And being really fully as much inclined to laugh as scold, for I esteemed it all girlish vanity, I at length relented in a measure, and asked, "If I consent to burn them, will you promise faithfully neither to send nor receive a letter again, nor a book, for I perceive you have sent him books, nor locks of hair, nor rings, nor playthings?" "We don't send playthings," cried Catherine, her pride overcoming her shame. "Nor anything at all, then, my lady?" I said. "Unless you will, here I go." "I promise, Ellen," she cried, catching my dress. "Oh, put them in the fire, do, do!" But when I proceeded to open a place with the poker, the sacrifice was too painful to be borne. She earnestly supplicated that I would spare her 1 or 2. 1 or 2, Ellen, to keep for Linton's sake. I unknotted the handkerchief and commenced dropping them in from an angle, and the flame curled up the chimney. "I will have 1, you cruel wretch!" she screamed, darting her hand into the fire, and drawing forth some half-consumed fragments at the expense of her fingers. "Very well, and I will have some to exhibit to papa," I answered, shaking back the rest into the bundle, and turning anew to the door. She emptied her blackened pieces into the flames, and motioned me to finish the immolation. It was done. I stirred up the ashes and interred them under a shovelful of coals, and she mutely, and with a sense of intense injury, retired to her private apartment. I descended to tell my master that the young lady's qualm of sickness was almost gone, but I judged it best for her to lie down a while. She wouldn't dine, but she reappeared at tea, pale and red about the eyes, and marvellously subdued in outward aspect. Next morning I answered the letter by a slip of paper inscribed, "Master Heathcliff is requested to send no more notes to Miss Linton, as she will not receive them." And henceforth the little boy came with vacant pockets. End of chapter 21. Recorded by Michelle Crandall, Fremont, California, October 2007.
Chapter 22 of Wuthering Heights. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Chris Turtle. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Chapter 22. Summer drew to an end, and early autumn. It was past Michaelmas, but the harvest was late that year, and a few of our fields were still uncleared. Mr. Linton and his daughter would frequently walk out among the reapers. At the carrying of the last sheaves they stayed till dusk, and the evening happening to be chill and damp, my master caught a bad cold that settled obstinately on his lungs and confined him indoors throughout the whole of the winter, nearly without intermission. Poor Cathy, frightened from her little romance, had been considerably sadder and duller since its abandonment, and her father insisted on her reading less and taking more exercise.
She had his companionship no longer. I esteemed it a duty to supply its lack as much as possible with mine, an inefficient substitute, for I could only spare 2 or 3 hours from my numerous diurnal occupations to follow her footsteps, and then my society was obviously less desirable than his. On an afternoon in October, or the beginning of November, a fresh watery afternoon when the turf and paths were rustling with moist withered leaves, and the cold blue sky was half hidden by clouds, dark grey streamers rapidly mounting from the west and boding abundant rain, I requested my young lady to forego a ramble because I was certain of showers. She refused, and I unwillingly donned a cloak and took my umbrella to accompany her on a stroll to the bottom of the park, a formal walk which she generally affected if low-spirited, and that she invariably was when Mr. Edgar had been worse than ordinary, a thing never known from his confession, but guessed both by her and me from his increased silence and the melancholy of his countenance. She went sadly on. There was no running or bounding now, though the chill wind might well have tempted her to race, and often from the side of my eye I could detect her raising an hand and brushing something off her cheek. I gazed round for a means of diverting her thoughts. On one side of the road rose a high, rough bank, where hazels and stunted oaks, with their roots half exposed, held uncertain tenure. The soil was too loose for the latter, and strong winds had blown some nearly horizontal. In summer Miss Catherine delighted to climb among these trunks, and sit in the branches, swinging 20 feet above the ground, and I, pleased with her agility and her light childish heart, still considered it proper to scold every time I caught her at such an elevation, but so that she would know there was no necessity for descending. From dinner to tea she would lie in her breeze-rocked cradle, doing nothing except singing old songs, my nursery law, to herself, or watching the birds, joint tenants, feed and entice their young ones to fly, or nestling with closed lids, half thinking, half dreaming, happier than words can express. "Look, miss," I exclaimed, pointing to a nook under the roots of one twisted tree. "Winter is not here yet. There's a little flower up yonder, the last bud from the multitude of bluebells that clouded those turf steps in July with a lilac mist. Will you clamber up and pluck it to show to papa?" Cathy stared a long time at the lonely blossom, trembling in its earthly shelter, and replied at length, "No, I'll not touch it. But it looks melancholy, does it not, Ellen?" "Yes," I observed, "about as starved and suckless as your cheeks are bloodless. Let us take hold of hands and run. You're so low, I dare say I shall keep up with you." "No," she repeated, and continued sauntering on, pausing at intervals to muse over a bit of moss, or a tuft of blanched grass, or a fungus spreading its bright orange among the heaps of brown foliage, and ever and anon her hand was lifted to her averted face. "Catherine, why are you crying, love?" I asked, approaching and putting my arm over her shoulder. "You mustn't cry because papa has a cold. Be thankful it is nothing worse." She now put no further restraint on her tears. Her breath was stifled by sobs. "Oh, it will be something worse," she said. "And what shall I do when papa and you leave me, and I am by myself? I can't forget your words, Ellen. They will always be in my ear. How life will be changed, how dreary the world will be when papa and you are dead." "None can tell whether you won't die before us," I replied. "It's wrong to anticipate evil. We'll hope there are years and years to come before any of us go. Master is young, and I am strong, and hardly 45. My mother lived till 80, a canty dame to the last. And suppose Mr. Linton was spared till he saw 60, that would be more years than you have counted, miss. And would it not be foolish to mourn a calamity above 20 years beforehand?" "But Aunt Isabella was younger than papa," she remarked, gazing up with timid hope to seek further consolation. "Aunt Isabella had not you and me to nurse her," I replied. "She wasn't as happy as master. She hadn't as much to live for. All you need do is to wait well on your father, and cheer him by letting him see you cheerful, and avoid giving him anxiety on any subject. Mind that, Cathy. I'll not disguise, but you might kill him if you were wild and reckless, and cherished a foolish, fanciful affection for the son of a person who would be glad to have him in his grave, and allowed him to discover that you fretted over the separation he has judged it expedient to make." "I fret about nothing on earth except papa's illness," answered my companion. "I care for nothing in comparison with papa, and I'll never, never, oh never will I have my senses do an act or say a word to vex him. I love him better than myself, Ellen, and I know it by this. I pray every night that I may live after him, because I would rather be miserable than that he should be. That proves I love him better than myself." "Good words," I replied, "but deeds must prove it also, and after he is well, remember you don't forget resolutions formed in the hour of fear." As we talked, we neared a door that opened on the road, and my young lady, lightening into sunshine again, climbed up and seated herself on the top of the wall, reaching over to gather some ips that bloomed scarlet on the summit branches of the wild rose trees shadowing the highway side. The lower fruit had disappeared, but only birds could touch the upper, except from Cathy's present station. In stretching to pull them, her hat fell off, and as the door was locked, she proposed scrambling down to recover it. I bid her be cautious, lest she got a fall, and she nimbly disappeared. But the return was no such easy matter. The stones were smooth and neatly cemented, and the rose bushes and blackberry stragglers could yield no assistance in reascending. I, like a fool, didn't recollect that, till I heard her laughing and exclaiming, "Ellen, you'll have to fetch the key, or else I must run round to the porter's lodge. I can't scale the ramparts on this side." "Stay where you are," I answered. "I have my bundle of keys in my pocket. Perhaps I may manage to open it. If not, I'll go." Catherine amused herself with dancing to and fro before the door, while I tried all the large keys in succession. I had applied the last, and found that none would do, so, repeating my desire that she would remain there, I was about to hurry home as fast as I could, when an approaching sound arrested me. It was the trot of a horse. Cathy's dance stopped also. "Who is that?" I whispered. "Ellen, I wish you could open the door," whispered back my companion anxiously. "Ho, Miss Linton," cried a deep voice, the rider's. "I'm glad to meet you. Don't be in haste to enter, for I have an explanation to ask and obtain." "I shan't speak to you, Mr. Heathcliff," answered Catherine. "Papa says you are a wicked man, and you hate both him and me, and Ellen says the same." "That is nothing to my purpose," said Heathcliff. He it was. "I don't hate my son, I suppose, and it is concerning him that I demand your attention. Yes, you have cause to blush. 2 or 3 months since, were you not in the habit of writing to Linton, making love in play, eh? You deserved, both of you, flogging for that. You especially, the elder, and less sensitive, as it turns out. I've got your letters, and if you give me any pertness, I'll send them to your father. I presume you grew weary of the amusement and dropped it, didn't you? Well, you dropped Linton with it into a slough of despond. He was in earnest, in love, really. As true as I live, he's dying for you, breaking his heart at your fickleness, not figuratively, but actually. Though Hareton has made him a standing jest for 6 weeks, and I have used more serious measures and attempted to frighten him out of his idiocy, he gets worse daily, and he'll be under the sod before summer unless you restore him." "How can you lie so glaringly to the poor child?" I called from the inside. "Pray ride on. How can you deliberately get up such paltry falsehoods? Miss Cathy, I'll knock the lock off with a stone. You won't believe that vile nonsense. You can feel it in yourself. It's impossible that a person should die for love of a stranger." "I was not aware there were eavesdroppers," muttered the detected villain. "Worthy Mrs. Dean, I like you, but I don't like your double-dealing," he added aloud. "How could you lie so glaringly as to affirm I hated the poor child, and invent bugbear stories to terrify her from my door-stones? Catherine Linton, the very name warms me. My bonny lass, I shall be home all this week. Go and see if I've not spoken truth. Do, there's a darling. Just imagine your father in my place, and Linton in yours. Then think how you would value your careless lover if he refused to stir a step to comfort you, when your father himself entreated him. And don't from pure stupidity fall into the same error. I swear on my salvation he's going to his grave, and none but you can save him." The lock gave way, and I issued out. "I swear Linton is dying," repeated Heathcliff, looking hard at me, "and grief and disappointment are hastening his death. Nelly, if you won't let her go, you can walk over yourself. But I shall not return till this time next week, and I think your master himself would scarcely object to her visiting her cousin." "Come in," said I, taking Cathy by the arm, and half forcing her to re-enter, for she lingered, viewing with troubled eyes the features of the speaker, too stern to express his inward deceit. He pushed his horse close, and bending down observed, "Miss Catherine, I'll own to you that I have little patience with Linton, and Hareton and Joseph have less. I'll own that he's with a harsh set. He pines for kindness, as well as love, and a kind word from you would be his best medicine. Don't mind Mrs. Dean's cruel cautions, but be generous, and contrive to see him. He dreams of you day and night, and cannot be persuaded that you don't hate him, since you neither write nor call." I closed the door, and rolled a stone to assist the loosened lock in holding it, and spreading my umbrella, I drew my charge underneath, for the rain began to drive through the moaning branches of the trees, and warned us to avoid delay. Our hurry prevented any comment on the encounter with Heathcliff, as we stretched towards home, but I divined instinctively that Catherine's heart was clouded now in double darkness. Her features were so sad they did not seem hers. She evidently regarded what she had heard as every syllable true. The master had retired to rest before we came in. Cathy stole to his room to inquire how he was. He had fallen asleep. She returned, and asked me to sit with her in the library. We took our tea together, and afterwards she lay down on the rug and told me not to talk, for she was weary. I got a book and pretended to read. As soon as she supposed me absorbed in my occupation, she recommenced her silent weeping. It appeared at present her favourite diversion. I suffered her to enjoy it a while. Then I expostulated, deriding and ridiculing all Mr. Heathcliff's assertions about his son, as if I was certain she would coincide. Alas, I hadn't skill to counteract the effect his account had produced. It was just what he intended. "You may be right, Helen," she answered, "but I shall never feel at ease till I know. And I must tell Linton it is not my fault that I don't write, and convince him that I shall not change." What use were anger and protestations against her silly credulity? We parted that night, hostile, but next day beheld me on the road to Wuthering Heights, by the side of my wilful young mistress's pony. I couldn't bear to witness her sorrow, to see her pale, dejected countenance and heavy eyes, and I yielded, in the faint hope that Linton himself might prove, by his reception of us, how little of the tale was founded on fact. End of chapter 22 of Wuthering Heights. Chapter 23 of Wuthering Heights. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording by Chris Turtle. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Chapter 23. The rainy night had ushered in a misty morning, half frost, half drizzle, and temporary brooks crossed our path, gurgling from the uplands. My feet were thoroughly wetted. I was cross and low, exactly the humour suited for making the most of these disagreeable things. We entered the farmhouse by the kitchen way, to ascertain whether Mr. Heathcliff were really absent, because I put slight faith in his own affirmation. Joseph seemed sitting in a sort of Elysium alone, beside a roaring fire, a quart of ale on a table near him, bristling with large pieces of toasted oat cake, and his black short pipe in his mouth. Catherine ran to the hearth to warm herself. I asked if the master was in. My question remained so long unanswered that I thought the old man had grown deaf, and repeated it louder. "Nah," he snarled, or rather screamed through his nose. "Nah, yeah, I'ma go back where you come fra." "Joseph!" cried a peevish voice, simultaneously with me from the inner room. "How often am I to call you? There are only a few red ashes now. Joseph, come this moment." Vigorous puffs and a resolute stare into the grate declared he had no ear for this appeal. The housekeeper and Hareton were invisible, one gone on an errand, and the other at his work probably. We knew Linton's tones, and entered. "Oh, I hope you'll die in a garret, starved to death," said the boy, mistaking our approach for that of his negligent attendant. He stopped on observing his error. His cousin flew to him. "Is that you, Miss Linton?" he said, raising his head from the arm of the great chair in which he reclined. "No, don't kiss me. It takes my breath. Dear me, papa said you would call," continued he, after recovering a little from Catherine's embrace, while she stood by looking very contrite. Will you shut the door, if you please? You left it open. Those detestable creatures won't bring coals to the fire. It's so cold. I stirred up the cinders and fetched a scuttleful myself. The invalid complained of being covered with ashes, but he had a tiresome cough and looked feverish and ill, so I did not rebuke his temper. "Well, Linton," murmured Catherine, when his corrugated brow relaxed, "are you glad to see me? Can I do you any good?" "Why didn't you come before?" he asked. "You should have come, instead of writing. It's tired me dreadfully, writing those long letters. I'd rather have talked to you. Now I can neither bear to talk, nor anything else. I wonder where Zillah is. Will you," looking at me, "step into the kitchen and see?" I received no thanks for my other service, and being unwilling to run to and fro at his behest, I replied, "Nobody is out there but Joseph." "I want to drink," he exclaimed fretfully, turning away. "Zillah is constantly gadding off to Gimmerton since Papa went. It's miserable, and I'm obliged to come down here. They resolved never to hear me upstairs." "Is your father attended to you, Master Heathcliff?" I asked, perceiving Catherine to be checked in her friendly advances. "Attentive? Makes them a little more attentive, at least," he cried. "The wretches! You know, Miss Linton, that brute Hareton laughs at me. I hate him. Indeed, I hate them all. They are odious beings." Cathy began searching for some water. She lighted on a pitcher in the dresser, filled a tumbler, and brought it. He bid her add a spoonful of wine from a bottle on the table, and having swallowed a small portion, appeared more tranquil, and said she was very kind. "And are you glad to see me?" asked she, reiterating her former question, and pleased to detect the faint dawn of a smile. "Yes, I am. It's something new to hear a voice like yours," he replied. "But I have been vexed because you wouldn't come, and Papa swore it was owing to me. He called me a pitiful, shuffling, worthless thing, and said you despised me, and if he had been in my place he would be more the master of the Grange than your father by this time. But you don't despise me, do you, Miss—" "I wish you would say Catherine or Cathy," interrupted my young lady. "Despise you? No. Next to Papa and Ellen, I love you better than anybody living. I don't love Mr. Heathcliff, though, and I dare not come when he returns. Will he stay away many days?" "Not many," answered Linton, "but he goes on to the moors frequently since the shooting season commenced, and you might spend an hour or two with me in his absence. Do say you will. I think I should not be peevish with you. You'd not provoke me, and you'd always be ready to help me, wouldn't you?" "Yes," said Catherine, stroking his long soft hair. "If I could only get Papa's consent, I'd spend half my time with you. Pretty Linton. I wish you were my brother." "And then you would like me as well as your father," observed he, more cheerfully. "But Papa says you would love me better than him and all the world if you were my wife, so I'd rather you were that." "No, I should never love anybody better than Papa," she returned gravely. "And people hate their wives sometimes, but not their sisters and brothers, and if you were the latter you would live with us, and Papa would be as fond of you as he is of me." Linton denied that people ever hated their wives, but Cathy affirmed they did, and in her wisdom instanced his own father's aversion to her aunt. I endeavoured to stop her thoughtless tongue. I couldn't succeed till everything she knew was out. Master Heathcliff, much irritated, asserted her relation was false. "Papa told me, and Papa does not tell falsehoods," she answered pertly. "My Papa scorns yours," cried Linton. "He calls him a sneaking fool." "Yours is a wicked man," retorted Catherine, "and you are very naughty to dare to repeat what he says. He must be wicked to have made Aunt Isabella leave him as she did." "She didn't leave him," said the boy. "You shan't contradict me." "She did," cried my young lady. "Well, I'll tell you something," said Linton. "Your mother hated your father. Now then—" "Oh!" exclaimed Catherine, too enraged to continue. "And she loved mine," added he. "You little liar! I hate you now," she panted, and her face grew red with passion. She did, sang Linton, sinking into the recess of his chair, and leaning back his head to enjoy the agitation of the other disputant, who stood behind. "Hush, Master Heathcliff," I said. "That's your father's tale too, I suppose." "It isn't. You hold your tongue," he answered. She did, Catherine. She did. Cathy, beside herself, gave the chair a violent push and caused him to fall against one arm. He was immediately seized by a suffocating cough that soon ended his triumph. It lasted so long that it frightened even me. As to his cousin, she wept with all her might, aghast at the mischief she had done, though she said nothing. I held him till the fit exhausted itself. Then he thrust me away, and leant his head down silently. Catherine quelled her lamentations also, took a seat opposite, and looked solemnly into the fire. "How do you feel now, Master Heathcliff?" I inquired, after waiting 10 minutes. "I wish she felt as I do," he replied. "Spiteful, cruel thing! Hareton never touches me. He never struck me in his life. And I was better today. And there—" His voice died in a whimper. "I didn't strike you," muttered Cathy, chewing her lip to prevent another burst of emotion. He sighed and moaned like one under great suffering, and kept it up for a quarter of an hour, on purpose to distress his cousin apparently, for whenever he caught a stifled sob from her, he put renewed pain and pathos into the inflections of his voice. "I'm sorry I hurt you, Linton," she said at length, racked beyond endurance, "but I couldn't have been hurt by that little push. And I had no idea that you could either. You're not much, are you, Linton? Don't let me go home thinking I've done you harm. Answer! Speak to me!" I can't speak to you," he murmured. "You've hurt me so that I shall lie awake all night choking with this cough. If you had it, you'd know what it was. But you'll be comfortably asleep while I'm in agony and nobody near me. I wonder how you would like to pass those fearful nights." And he began to wail aloud for very pity of himself. "Since you are in the habit of passing dreadful nights," I said, "it won't be Miss who spoils your ease. You'd be the same had she never come. However, she shall not disturb you again, and perhaps you'll get quieter when we leave you." "Must I go?" asked Catherine dolefully, bending over him. "Do you want me to go, Linton?" "You can't alter what you've done," he replied, pettishly, shrinking from her, "unless you alter it for the worse, by teasing me into a fever." "Well, then, I must go?" she repeated. "Let me alone at least," said he. "I can't bear your talking." She lingered, and resisted my persuasions to departure a tiresome while, but as he neither looked up nor spoke, she finally made a movement to the door, and I followed. We were recalled by a scream. Linton had slid from his seat onto the hearthstone, and lay writhing in the mere perverseness of an indulged plague of a child, determined to be as grievous and harassing as it can. I thoroughly gauged his disposition from his behaviour, and saw at once it would be folly to attempt humouring him. Not so my companion. She ran back in terror, knelt down and cried, and soothed and entreated, till he grew quiet from lack of breath, by no means from compunction at distressing her. "I shall lift him on to the settle," I said, "and he may roll about as he pleases. We can't stop to watch him. I hope you are satisfied, Miss Cathy, that you are not the person to benefit him, and that his condition of health is not occasioned by attachment to you. Now then, there he is. Come away. As soon as he knows there is nobody by to care for his nonsense, he'll be glad to lie still." She placed a cushion under his head, and offered him some water. He rejected the latter, and tossed uneasily on the former, as if it were a stone or a block of wood. She tried to put it more comfortably. "I can't do with that," he said. "It's not high enough." Catherine brought another to lay above it. "That's too high," murmured the provoking thing. "How must I arrange it, then?" she asked despairingly. He twined himself up to her as she half knelt by the settle, and converted her shoulder into a support. "No, that won't do," I said. "You'll be content with the cushion, Master Heathcliff. Miss has wasted too much time on you already. We cannot remain 5 minutes longer." Yes, we can," replied Cathy. "He's good and patient now. He's beginning to think I shall have far greater misery than he will tonight, if I believe he is the worse for my visit, and then I dare not come again. Tell the truth about it, Linton, for I mustn't come if I have hurt you." "You must come, to cure me," he answered. You ought to come, because you have hurt me. You know you have extremely. I was not as ill when you entered as I am at present, was I? But you've made yourself ill by crying and being in a passion. I didn't do it all, said his cousin. However, we'll be friends now, and you want me. You would wish to see me sometimes, really? I told you I did, he replied impatiently. Sit on the settle, and let me lean on your knee. That's as mamma used to do. Whole afternoons together. Sit quite still and don't talk. But you may sing a song, if you can sing, or you may say a nice long interesting ballad, one of those you promised to teach me, or a story. I'd rather have a ballad, though. Begin. Catherine repeated the longest she could remember. The enjoyment pleased both mightily. Linton would have another, and after that another, notwithstanding my strenuous objections, and so they went on until the clock struck 12, and we heard Hareton in the court, returning for his dinner. And tomorrow, Catherine? Will you be here tomorrow? Asked the young Heathcliff, holding her frock as she rose reluctantly. No, I answered, nor next day neither. She, however, gave a different response evidently, for his forehead cleared as she stooped and whispered in his ear. You won't go tomorrow, recollect, miss, I commenced, when we were out of the house. You're not dreaming of it, are you? She smiled. Oh, I'll take good care, I continued. I'll have that lock mended, and you can escape by no way else. I can get over the wall, she said, laughing. The Grange is not a prison, Ellen, and you are not my jailer. And besides, I'm almost 17. I'm a woman, and I'm certain Linton would recover quickly if he had me to look after him. I'm older than he is, you know, and wiser. Less childish, am I not? And he'll soon do as I direct him, with some slight coaxing. He's a pretty little darling when he's good. I'd make such a pet of him if he were mine. We should never quarrel, should we, after we were used to each other? Don't you like him, Ellen? Like him? I exclaimed. The worst-tempered bit of a sickly slip that ever struggled into its teens. Happily, as Mr. Heathcliff conjectured, he'll not win 20. I doubt whether he'll see spring indeed, and small loss to his family whenever he drops off. And lucky it is that his father took him. The kinder he was treated, the more tedious and selfish he'd be. I'm glad you have no chance of having him for a husband, Miss Catherine. My companion waxed serious at hearing this speech. To speak of his death so regardlessly wounded her feelings. He's younger than I, she answered, after a protracted pause of meditation, and he ought to live the longest. He will. He must live as long as I do. He's as strong now as when he first came into the north. I'm positive of that. It's only a cold that ails him, the same as Papa has. You say Papa will get better. And why shouldn't he? Well, well, I cried. After all, we needn't trouble ourselves. For listen, miss, and mind, I'll keep my word. If you attempt going to Wuthering Heights again, with or without me, I shall inform Mr. Linton, and unless he allow it, the intimacy with your cousin must not be revived. It has been revived, muttered Cathy, sulkily. Must not be continued, then, I said. We'll see, was her reply, and she set off at a gallop, leaving me to toil in the rear. We both reached home before our dinner time. My master supposed we had been wandering through the park, and therefore he demanded no explanation of our absence. As soon as I entered, I hastened to change my soaked shoes and stockings, but sitting such a while at the Heights had done the mischief. On the succeeding morning I was laid up, and during 3 weeks I remained incapacitated for attending to my duties, a calamity never experienced prior to that period, and never, I am thankful to say, since. My little mistress behaved like an angel in coming to wait on me and cheer up my solitude. The confinement brought me exceedingly low. It is wearisome to a stirring, active body, but few have slighter reasons for complaint than I had. The moment Catherine left Mr. Linton's room, she appeared at my bedside. Her day was divided between us. No amusement usurped a minute. She neglected her meals, her studies, and her play, and she was the fondest nurse that ever watched. She must have had a warm heart, when she loved her father so, to give so much to me. I said her days were divided between us, but the master retired early, and I generally needed nothing after 6 o'clock. Thus the evening was her own. Poor thing! I never considered what she did with herself after tea, and though frequently, when she looked in to bid me good night, I remarked a fresh colour in her cheeks, and a pinkness over her slender fingers, instead of fancying the line borrowed from a cold ride across the moors, I laid it to the charge of an hot fire in the library. End of chapter 23.
Chapter 24 of Wuthering Heights. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Maria Tafidis. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Chapter 24. At the close of 3 weeks, I was able to quit my chamber and move about the house. And on the first occasion of my sitting up in the evening, I asked Catherine to read to me, because my eyes were weak. We were in the library, the master having gone to bed. She consented, rather unwillingly, I fancied, and imagining my sort of books did not suit her, I began to please herself in the choice of what she perused. She selected one of her own favourites, and got forward steadily about an hour. Then came frequent questions. "Ellen, are not you tired? Hadn't you better lie down now? You'll be sick keeping up so long, Ellen." "No, no, dear, I'm not tired," I returned continually. Perceiving me immovable, she essayed another method of showing her disrelish for her occupation. It changed to yawning and stretching and, "Ellen, I'm tired." "Give over, then, and talk," I answered. That was worse. She fretted and sighed and looked at her watch till 8, and finally went to her room, completely overdone with sleep. Judging by her peevish, heavy look, the constant rubbing she inflicted on her eyes. The following night she seemed more impatient still, and on the third from recovering my company she complained of a headache, and left me. I thought her conduct odd, and having remained alone a long while, I resolved on going and inquiring whether she were better, and asking her to come and lie on the sofa, instead of upstairs in the dark. No Catherine could I discover upstairs, and none below. The servants affirmed they had not seen her. I listened at Mr. Edgar's door. All was silence. I returned to her apartment, extinguished my candle, and seated myself in the window. The moon shone bright, a sprinkling of snow covered the ground, and I reflected that she might, possibly, have taken it into her head to walk about the garden for refreshment. I did detect a figure creeping along the inner fence of the park, but it was not my young mistress. On its emerging into the light, I recognized one of the grooms. He stood a considerable period viewing the carriage road through the grounds, then started off at a brisk pace, as if he had detected something, and reappeared presently, leading Mrs. Pony. And there she was, just dismounted, and walking by its side. The man took his charge stealthily across the grass towards the stable. Cathy entered by the casement window of the drawing-room, and glided noiselessly up to where I awaited her. She put the door gently to, slipped off her snowy shoes, untied her hat, and was proceeding, unconscious of my espionage, to lay aside her mantle, when I suddenly rose and revealed myself. The surprise petrified her an instant. She uttered an inarticulate exclamation, and stood fixed. "My dear Miss Catherine," I began, too vividly impressed by her recent kindness to break into a scold, "where have you been riding out at this hour? And why should you try to deceive me by telling a tale? Where have you been? Speak!" "To the bottom of the park," she stammered. "I didn't tell a tale." "And nowhere else?" I demanded. "No," was the muttered reply. "Oh, Catherine!" I cried sorrowfully. "You know you've been doing wrong, or you wouldn't be driven to uttering an untruth to me. That does grieve me. I'd rather be 3 months ill than hear you frame a deliberate lie." she sprang forward, and bursting into tears, threw her arms round my neck. "Well, Ellen, I am so afraid of you being angry," she said. "Promise not to be angry, and you shall know the very truth. I hate to hide it." We sat down in the window seat. I assured her I would not scold, whatever her secret might be, and I guessed it, of course. So she commenced. "I've been to Wuthering Heights, Ellen, and I've never missed going a day since you fell ill, except thrice before and twice after you left your room. I gave Michael books and pictures to prepare Minnie every evening and to put her back in the stable. You mustn't scold him either, mind. I was at the Heights by 6:30, and generally stayed till 8:30, and then galloped home. It was not to amuse myself that I went. I was often wretched all the time. Now and then I was happy. Once in a week, perhaps. At first I expected there would be sad work persuading you to let me keep my word to Linton, for I had engaged to call again next day when we quitted him. But as you stayed upstairs on the morrow, I escaped that trouble. While Michael was refastening the lock of the park door in the afternoon, I got possession of the key, and told him how my cousin wished me to visit him, because he was sick and couldn't come to the Grange, and how Papa would object to my going, and then I negotiated with him about the pony. He's fond of reading, and he thinks of leaving soon to get married, so he offered, if I would lend him books out of the library, to do what I wished, but I preferred giving him my own, and that satisfied him better. On my second visit Linton seemed in lively spirits, and Zillah, that is their housekeeper, made us a clean room and a good fire, and told us that as Joseph was out at a prayer meeting, and Catherine Earnshaw was off with his dogs, robbing our woods of pheasants, as I heard afterwards, we might do what we liked. She brought me some warm wine and gingerbread, and appeared exceedingly good-natured, and Linton sat in the armchair, and I in the little rocking-chair on the hearthstone, and we laughed and talked so merrily, and found so much to say. We planned where we would go, and what we would do in summer. I needn't repeat that, because you would call it silly. One time, however, we were near quarrelling. He said the pleasantest manner of spending a hot July day was lying from morning till evening on a bank of heath in the middle of the moors, with the bees humming dreamily about among the bloom, and the larks singing high up overhead, and the blue sky and bright sun shining steadily and cloudlessly. That was his most perfect idea of heaven's happiness. Mine was rocking in a rustling green tree, with a west wind blowing, and bright white clouds flitting rapidly above, and not only larks, but throstles and blackbirds and linnets and cuckoos pouring out music on every side, and the moors seen at a distance, broken into cool dusky dells, but close by great swells of long grass undulating in waves to the breeze, and woods in sounding water, and the whole world awake and wild with joy. He wanted all to lie in an ecstasy of peace. I wanted all to sparkle and dance in a glorious jubilee. I said his heaven would be only half alive, and he said mine would be drunk. I said I should fall asleep in his, and he said he could not breathe in mine, and began to grow very snappish. At last we agreed to try both, as soon as the right weather came, and then we kissed each other and were friends. After sitting still an hour, I looked at the great room with its smooth uncarpeted floor, and thought how nice it would be to play in if we moved the table, and I asked Linton to call Zillah in to help us, and we'd have a game at blindman's buff. She should try to catch us. You used to, you know, Ellen. He wouldn't. There was no pleasure in it, he said. But he consented to play at ball with me. We found two in a cupboard, among a heap of old toys, tops and hoops, and battledores and shuttlecocks. One was marked C, and the other H. I wished to have the C, because that stood for Catherine, and the H might be for Heathcliff, his name. But the brown came out of H, and Linton didn't like it. I beat him constantly, and he got cross again and coughed, and returned to his chair. That night, though, he easily recovered his good humour. He was charmed with 2 or 3 pretty songs, your songs, Ellen, and when I was obliged to go, he begged and entreated me to come the following evening, and I promised. Minnie and I went flying home as light as air, and I dreamt of Wuthering Heights and my sweet darling cousin till morning. On the morrow I was sad, partly because we were poorly, and partly that I wished my father knew and approved of my excursions. But it was beautiful moonlight after tea, and as I rode on, the gloom cleared. I shall have another happy evening, I thought to myself, and what delights me more, my pretty Linton will. I trotted up the garden, and was turning round to the back, when that fellow Earnshaw met me, took my bridle, and bid me go in by the front entrance. He patted me in his neck, and said he was a bonny beast, and appeared as if he wanted me to speak to him. I only told him to leave my horse alone, or else it would kick him. He answered in his vulgar accent, "It wouldn't do me to hurt if it did," and served its legs with a smile. I was half inclined to make it try. However, he moved off to open the door, and as he raised the latch, he looked up to the inscription above, and said, with a stupid mixture of awkwardness and elation, "Miss Catherine, I can read you now." "Wonderful!" I exclaimed. "Pray let us hear you. You are grown clever." He spelt and drawled over by syllables the name Catherine Earnshaw. "And the figures?" I cried encouragingly, perceiving that he came to a dead halt. "I cannot tell them yet," he answered. "Oh, you don't!" I said, laughing heartily at his failure. The fool stared, with a grin hovering about his lips, and a scowl gathering over his eyes, as if uncertain whether he might not join in my mirth, whether it were not pleasant familiarity, or what it really was, contempt. I settled his doubts by suddenly retrieving my gravity, and desiring him to walk away, for I came to see Linton, not him. He reddened, I saw that by the moonlight, dropped his hand from the latch, and skulked off, a picture of mortified vanity. He imagined himself to be as accomplished as Linton, I suppose, because he could spell his own name, and was marvellously discomfited that I didn't think the same. "Stop, Miss Catherine, dear," I interrupted. "I shall not scold, but I don't like your conduct there. If you had remembered that Hareton was your cousin as much as Master Heathcliff, you would have felt how improper it was to behave in that way. At least it was praiseworthy ambition for him to desire to be as accomplished as Linton, and probably he did not learn merely to show off. You had made him ashamed of his ignorance before, I have no doubt, and he wished to remedy it and please you. To sneer at his imperfect attempts was very bad breeding. Had you been brought up in his circumstances, would you be less rude? He was as quick and as intelligent a child as ever you were. And I'm hurt that he should be despised now, because that base Heathcliff has treated him so unjustly." "Well, Ellen, you won't cry about it, will you?" she exclaimed, surprised at my earnestness. "But wait, and you shall hear if he called his ABC to please me, and if it were worth while being civil to the brute." I entered. Linton was lying on the settle, and half got up to welcome me. "I'm ill to-night, Catherine, love," he said, "and you must have all the talk and let me listen. Come and sit by me. I was sure you wouldn't break your word, and I'll make you promise again before you go." I knew now that I mustn't tease him as he was ill, and I spoke softly and put no questions, and avoided irritating him in any way. I had brought some of my nicest books for him. He asked me to read a little of one, and I was about to comply, when Earnshaw burst the door open, having gathered venom with reflection. He advanced direct to us, seized Linton by the arm, and swung him on the seat. "Get to thy own room," he said in a voice almost inarticulate with passion, and his face looked swell and furious. "Take her there, if she comes to see thee. Thou shalt keep me out of this. Begone with you both." He swore at us, and left Linton no time to answer, nearly throwing him into the kitchen, and he clenched his fist as I followed, seemingly longing to knock me down. I was afraid for a moment, and I let one volume fall. He kicked it after me and shut us out. I heard a malignant, crackly laugh by the fire, and turning, beheld that odious Joseph standing rubbing his bony hands and quivering. "I were sure he'd starve you out. He's a good round lad. He's getting great spirit in him. He knows as well as I do who's been master yonder. He made you skiff properly." "Where must we go?" I asked of my cousin, disregarding the old wretch's mockery. Linton was white and trembling. He was not pretty then, Ellen. Oh, no! He looked frightful, for his thin face and large eyes were wrought into an expression of frenzied, powerless fury. He grasped the handle of the door and shook it. It was fastened inside. "If you don't let me in, I'll kill you! If you don't let me in, I'll kill you!" he rather shrieked than said. "Devil! Devil! I'll kill you! I'll kill you!" Joseph uttered his croaking laugh again. "There, that's father," he cried. "That's father. We've either Somerto or the side in us. Never heed, Hareton. Do not be feared. He cannot get at thee." I took hold of Linton's hands and tried to pull him away, but he shrieked so shockingly that I dared not proceed. At last his cries were choked by a dreadful fit of coughing. Blood gushed from his mouth, and he fell on the ground. I ran into the yard, sick with terror, and called for Zillah as loud as I could. She soon heard me. She was milking the cows in a shed behind the barn, and hurrying from her work, she inquired what there was to do. I hadn't breath to explain. Dragging her in, I looked about for Linton. Earnshaw had come out to examine the mischief he had caused, and he was then conveying the poor thing upstairs. Zillah and I ascended after him, but he stopped me at the top of the steps, and said I shouldn't go in. I must go home. I exclaimed that he had killed Linton, and I would enter. Joseph locked the door, and declared I should do no such stuff, and asked me whether I were bound to be as mad as him. I stood crying till the housekeeper reappeared. She affirmed he would be better in a bit, but he couldn't do without shrieking and din, and she took me and nearly carried me into the house. Ellen, I was ready to tear my hair off my head. I sobbed and wept so that my eyes were almost blind, and the ruffian you have such sympathy with stood opposite, presuming every now and then to bid me wisht, and denying that it was his fault. And finally, frightened by my assertions that I would tell Papa, and that he should be put in prison and hanged, he commenced blubbering himself, and hurried out to hide his cowardly agitation. Still I was not rid of him. When at length they compelled me to depart, and I had got some 100 yards off the premises, he suddenly issued from the shadow of the roadside, and checked Minnie and took hold of me. Miss Catherine Emile grieved him again, but it's rather too bad. I gave him a cut with my whip, thinking perhaps he would murder me. He let go, thundering one of his horrid curses, and I galloped home more than half out of my senses. I didn't bid you good night that evening, and I didn't go to Wuthering Heights the next. I wished to go exceedingly, but I was strangely excited, and dreaded to hear that Linton was dead, sometimes, and sometimes shuddered at the thought of encountering Hareton. On the third day I took courage. At least I couldn't bear longer suspense, and stole off once more. I went at 5 o'clock and walked, fancying I might manage to creep into the house, and up to Linton's room unobserved. However, the dogs gave notice of my approach. Zillah received me, and, saying the land was mending nicely, showed me into a small, tidy, carpeted apartment, where, to my inexpressible joy, I beheld Linton laid on a little sofa, reading one of my books. But he would neither speak to me nor look at me through a whole hour, Ellen. He has such an unhappy temper. and what quite confounded me, when he did open his mouth, it was to utter the falsehood that I had occasioned the uproar, and Hareton was not to blame. Unable to reply, except passionately, I got up and walked from the room. He sent after me a faint "Catherine." He did not reckon on being answered so, but I wouldn't turn back, and the morrow was the second day on which I stayed at home, and nearly determined to visit him no more. But it was so miserable going to bed and getting up, and never hearing anything about him, that my resolution melted into air before it was properly formed. It had appeared wrong to take the journey once. Now it seemed wrong to refrain. Michael came to ask if he must saddle Minnie. I said yes, and considered myself doing a duty as she bore me over the hills. I was forced to pass the front windows to get to the court. It was no use trying to conceal my presence. "Young master is in the house," said Zillah, as she saw me making for the parlour. I went in. Earnshaw was there also, but he quitted the room directly. Linton sat in the great armchair, half asleep. Walking up to the fire, I began in a serious tone, partly meaning it to be true. "As you don't like me, Linton, and as you think I come on purpose to hurt you, and pretend that I do so every time, this is our last meeting. Let us say good-bye, and tell Mr. Heathcliff that you have no wish to say, that he mustn't invent any more falsehoods on the subject." "Sit down and take your hat off, Catherine," he answered. "You are so much happier than I am, you ought to be better. Papa talks enough of my defects, and shows enough scorn of me, to make it natural I should doubt myself. I doubt whether I am not altogether as worthless as he calls me frequently. And then I feel so cross and bitter, I hate everybody. I am worthless, and bad in temper, and bad in spirit almost always. And if you choose, you may say good-bye. You'll get rid of annoyance. Only, Catherine, do me this justice, believe that if I might be as sweet and as kind and as good as you are, I would be, as willingly and more so than as happy and as healthy. And believe that your kindness has made me love you deeper than if I deserved your love. And though I couldn't and cannot help showing my nature to you, I regret it and repent it, and shall regret and repent it till I die." I felt he spoke the truth, and I felt I must forgive him, and though we should quarrel the next moment, I must forgive him again. We were reconciled, but we cried, both of us, the whole time I stayed. Not entirely for sorrow, yet I was sorry Linton had that distorted nature. He'll never let his friends be at ease, and he'll never be at ease himself. I have always gone to his little parlour since that night, because his father returned the day after. About 3 times, I think, we have been merry and hopeful, as we were the first evening. The rest of my visits were dreary and troubled. Now with his selfishness and spite, and now with his sufferings. But I have learned to endure the former with nearly as little resentment as the latter. Mr. Heathcliff purposely avoids me. I have hardly seen him at all. Last Sunday, indeed, coming earlier than usual, I heard him abusing poor Linton cruelly for his conduct the night before. I can't tell how he knew of it, unless he listened. Linton had certainly behaved provokingly. However, it was the business of nobody but me, and I interrupted Mr. Heathcliff's lecture by entering and telling him so. He burst into a laugh and went away, saying he was glad I took that view of the matter. Since then, I have told Linton he must whisper his bitter things. Now, Ellen, you have heard all. I can't be prevented from going to Wuthering Heights, except by inflicting misery on 2 people. Whereas, if you'll only not tell Papa, my going need disturb the tranquillity of none. You'll not tell, will you? It will be very heartless if you do. "I'll make up my mind on that point by tomorrow, Miss Catherine," I replied. "It requires some study, and so I'll leave you to your rest and go think it over." I thought it over aloud in my master's presence, walking straight from her room to his, and relating the whole story, with the exception of her conversations with her cousin, and any mention of Hareton. Mr. Linton was alarmed and distressed, more than he would acknowledge to me. In the morning Catherine learnt my betrayal of her confidence, and she learnt also that her secret visits were to end. In vain she wept and writhed against the interdict, and implored her father to have pity on Linton. All she got to comfort her was a promise that he would write and give him leave to come to the Grange when he pleased, but explaining that he must no longer expect to see Catherine at Wuthering Heights. Perhaps, had he been aware of his nephew's disposition and state of health, he would have seen fit to withhold even that slight consolation. End of chapter 24.